From a distant planet, an amoeba grew tired of being a corporate employee, and decided to escape to Earth, finally stepping away from the grind. He just wanted to retire, but his strange behavior confused everyone around him. He went through hell but became a true legend. Will he be able to keep his secret and finally rest? Or will he have to face the consequences of his actions here on Earth? What will be the fate of a magical amoeba here on Earth? We will have to find out. The story begins at a press conference where reporters demanded answers. They asked if it was true that he had cleared an A-rank dungeon by himself. Rumors surfaced that he had defeated an S-rank hunter during the incident. Was he hiding his awakening level all this time? The protagonist looked at them in silence, and thought it was just a coincidence. It wasn't about the skills that the gathered people were discussing. He was there thanks to a bit of luck and charm. The reporter shouted what his plans were for the upcoming cases. The protagonist thought about what a Greek gift really was. He retorted that if he had plans, this wouldn't have happened. He wondered what would happen if they discovered he was just a rank F hunter. The supposedly defeated S-rank hunter would want to destroy him. It was unlikely that the elite ranker would leave him alone after the incident. They might even cast a curse on him. That was a true disaster. During a live broadcast, the protagonist declared that he didn't want to answer. The comments questioned whether he had really refused to answer the question. Some of them said he had a foolish look and a Babylonian attitude. Had they found a difficult genius hunter? At that moment, the journalist shouted if he was manipulating the association. With his head down, he thought no matter what he said, the headlines would dictate tomorrow. If he didn't clarify the situation, he risked dying as a hunter. The reporters approached the hunter. The protagonist said in a grim tone, calling them kids. They stared at him in surprise, demanding those words. The protagonist thought it didn't matter. In any case, he wouldn't last much longer on that decaying planet. As his face was blinded by the camera flashes, he thought about when everything went wrong. It all started with his resignation. In fact, he wasn't a resident of that planet. On a planet with highly developed magic, he held the role of a high mage. However, at some point, a thought crossed his mind. He wanted to resign. He could no longer stand being a corporate employee. His job was public, so even hard work wasn't well compensated. 640 days of work per year without vacations or days off. Overtime became the norm over time. He couldn't remember the last time he left work on time. But thinking about it, the only problem was how to resign. He was tasked with an important role from which one couldn't simply walk away. High-ranking creatures are limited in their ability to escape work. His brain would take a shock if he tried to use teleportation magic. Even if he managed to leave his workplace, it was impossible to hide. The protagonist had a thought. Why not get rid of them? He couldn't harm his own race or himself. Going on the run was out of the question. However, during yet another brainstorming session, he had an idea. Magic only limits his body but doesn't affect his soul. So perhaps the soul could escape, right? The protagonist lived with this idea for 10 years. After many trials and errors, a unique spell would work. He would be able to separate his soul and settle on a remote planet. The protagonist used magic and thought it was a success. He truly managed to be a real genius. He bid farewell to his damn job. He wished those idiots would figure out how to manage the planet without him. He opened his eyes and looked at his hand in surprise. The protagonist thought it looked like an elongated protein mass. Luck was on his side. It seemed that the host's soul had recently left this body. In any case, his plan worked. He thought with a smile that even reincarnation was a simple task for him. He tested his vocal cords and found that imitating the local language felt natural. He also didn't feel any issues with motor functions. However, why couldn't he remember anything? He needed information. His memories seemed to be shattered. Suddenly, he cried out in pain, clutching his neck with his hand. Where did the sudden pain in his stomach come from? The protagonist asked with difficulty. Something went wrong. He saw fragments of memory, and thought that this body had died of hunger. He had set several conditions before using the magic. The first condition was to reincarnate as a creature with the greatest magical power on the planet. If this condition were met, then the object should also possess the greatest intelligence. He thought while holding his stomach and sneaking around in search of food. No matter how much he searched, he never found any. In the streets of the city, he wondered what kind of planet this was that had no food. In this way, that body was going back to the American stores. At that moment, he spotted a little cockroach, and it didn't have 7 layers of frills. He grabbed an insect and said with his mouth open that he was grateful for the food. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed the boy and thought he was a creature of his kind. He seemed to be a young specimen and had something in his mouth. The protagonist threw the insect away and said it was clearly food. It looked very appetizing, and with his face changing, he wondered if he should take it by force. He decided to follow him, and ironically, a sign appeared reporting suspicious activity. The boy turned around and thought that this was a very suspicious man. He decided to run away from him, and the protagonist shouted while running that he should wait for him. In an alley of the city, He looked around and thought he had escaped. The protagonist saw pots with plants and asked what they were. He realized they were not edible plants. It's still better than stealing someone else's food. He was about to eat when he heard a noise coming from the alley. The protagonist averted his confused gaze, and the sound grew louder. That was definitely a scream. He better check what happened there. The boy looked up in great fear. While his legs trembled, what was in front of him was a monster. The monster advanced towards him, and the student screamed and began to run from that being. After a while, the monster's beak grabbed the student's backpack. The boy fell to the ground screaming and dodged the monster's strike at the last moment. The monster tried to reach him by opening its beak. He shouted that he needed help. The protagonist thought while looking at the monster that this is a feathered creature. This monster is the size of an entire house, as he found while walking down the street. The protagonist asked, confused, what was wrong with their civilization. He encountered many things that didn't make sense, but even thought it might be better this way. Remembering the chicken mascot, this enormous creature was associated with food. It seemed he could even vaguely taste it. A wild animal is a suitable prey. It wouldn't be difficult for a great wizard to kill this monster. Once he adapts to the local magic, conquering such a small planet will be easy. The protagonist thought, feeling the mana, and wondered if it was magic. The energy is incredibly powerful. It seems to permeate every cell of his body. That was definitely local magic. Our hero fell to the ground and said that this mana was too much. Comparing the magic to that of his planet, it was considered a full bucket, while here it was a pool. The protagonist shouted, holding his head with his hand, this is his dazzling future. With so much magic, nothing is impossible for him. The boy shouted that he was asking for help. The protagonist thought about how he could ask for help if he wasn't the tough guy of magic. He said he would help him on one condition. He wanted what the boy had in his hand. He asked, surprised, if he was serious. The monster behind him began to free itself from the wire trap. He screamed in fear that he agreed to give it to him. The protagonist said he should stay behind him. He thought that since he was from the magical elite responsible for the planet's defense, he would finish it off quickly. He extended his hands and concentrated all his power, but nothing happened. He commented that this was strange and that maybe he was just anxious about his first day. He tried to cast an explosion spell, but not even the powder appeared. Then he tried to cast a water-type magic, but not even a drizzle occurred. He tried other types of spells, but none worked. He looked at his hand, frozen, wondering why his magic wasn't working. The protagonist ran from the monster in panic and shouted that he needed help. Then on the road, he almost got hit by a car. The driver shouted, calling him an idiot, and thought that guy wanted to go to the American stores. The protagonist thought that this creature had chased him as long as it could see him. He needed to change direction. The monster was furiously chasing him as he ran in panic. Then the protagonist thought he had come out onto a wide road. Why was this creature only chasing him? And he thought he hadn't eaten anything. Things were bad for him, and he felt weak. Suddenly, the monster jumped high, and he wondered if this enormous creature could also fly. He was fleeing from the monster, and thought that at this rate, he himself would be devoured. Suddenly, the protagonist felt a pain in his leg and thought something was limiting him. He lost his balance in a construction site. The monster passed by him, hitting the building with its beak. There was a deafening roar, causing him to cover his ears with his hands. He opened his eyes and asked, looking at the monster's body, what had happened. This creature really collided with the wall. The protagonist thought that some birds dive at dangerous angles and collide. He wanted to ask the local scientists why these creatures were so stupid. He noticed, as his stomach growled, that now was not the time for that. He thought, touching the monster with his hand, whether it was edible. Then the amino acid structure must be suitable for eating. Seavoyan, the hunter, asked in shock how this happened. She looked at him with a look of total surprise. Then Wu Yun remembered how the boy screamed while the police officer ran beside him, saying they needed to get there faster. The monster was chasing a man. They needed to hurry, she asked. It was last seen here. The police officer confirmed that it was. Wu Yun declared that they should not approach. She thought it was a rookie killer, a bird monster that lived near the sand gate. Originally, she thought it was a monster that could be defeated with a normal weapon. At some point, the classification of the rookie killer was raised to C due to its speed. Wu gritted her teeth and thought that hunters wouldn't even have time to react to the attack. She needed to act quickly to avoid casualties. Then she thought she couldn't believe her eyes. There was a person there who left her speechless. She wondered if it was really possible. Surprise. The police officer shouted to Wu what was wrong. The boy shouted to him that he had brought the police. The police officer thanked him for his work. He said they received a tip about the monster and rushed over. They were incredibly lucky to have a hunter nearby. The protagonist was confused. He was really called a hunter. He couldn't remember who or what hunters were. The police officer said with a smile that he was grateful to him for capturing the monster. Wu was surprised at how he defeated that monster alone. The habitat of the rookie killer is a quicksand area, so it's easier to capture. It was enough to navigate the surroundings to catch it on a hard surface. However, this requires elite skill, and analyzing it died this way. This means that the classification of this hunter is no less than C. After a while, the protagonist told the boy that he should stay still. The protagonist asked, extending his hand, if he remembered their agreement. The boy, reluctant, handed over his food. Then he tasted the food and felt it was incredible. It had been so long since he evolved that he forgot how good it was to savor something. The agent wondered if she really took candy from a child. The boy sadly said it was his fresh tangerine. She introduced herself, and said she was from the Hunters Association. Wu shook his hand and commented that it was amazing that he had defeated the monster. The protagonist greeted her with his hands dirty from food. He said, wiping his hand with a napkin, that his face was unknown to her. She should send a report to the association, so she asked for his license. He would try to avoid it in every way since he didn't know what it was. Our hero said he was sorry to her but didn't bring one with him. Woon crossed his arms and said that he would just look it up in the system and asked for his details. He still hadn't remembered the name of this body. She looked at him confused and then shouted if he really had one. If not, it would be illegal. The protagonist thought he didn't quite understand but was in a bind. He said he had registered. He just left his license at home and would bring it in a jump. His face said the opposite, like he would never come back here. At his house, he searched for documents. He ended up finding a card with his new name, Kim Kiryu. He also looked for the so-called hunter's license but had no luck. He looked on the table and found a pack. He wondered what that pack was, and a memory came. It was cigarettes. The owner of this previous body was a lousy, rotten, and hoarse smoker. For mages, this is an extremely destructive habit. They combine the internal energy that circulates in the body with the external energy that exists in nature. Where this magic is combined is in the respiratory system, that is, in the lungs. The protagonist threw the pack of cigarettes on the ground and shouted in anger that he couldn't use magic because of this idiot. How could he destroy his own lungs? He shouted indignantly. He is indeed the pride of the Proerd. In Alpha Ori, where most of the population had magic, this was unthinkable. He hoped they could be primitive, but this type really surprised him. Kiryu exhaled heavily and thought he should calm down. The protagonist said frustrated that he could no longer change the past. It was his fault for thinking only about the amount of magic and not the state of his body. The protagonist thought there should be a way to fix everything. After all, he managed to escape, so he was not willing to give up so quickly. At the police station in search of answers, he pursued a personal investigation. The police officer asked why he was doing that. The protagonist apologized, lowering his head. He said he underestimated life on Earth. After 10 minutes of a personal investigation, he stepped out onto the street, hungry. He thought the conversation had lasted 10 minutes, and his hunger had not diminished. Shivering, he thought he had much to learn, but he needed to eat first. He smelled something very pleasant, and wondered where it came from. After that, Kiryu read the sign of the establishment, and thought about what pork soup was. After a while, a hot soup was placed on the protagonist's table. The food was so close. He had just been torturing himself in vain all this time. It was time to try that appetizing food. He thought as he began to eat that it was wonderful. It was incredibly hot but delicious. His mouth was burning as if he had bitten into a coccinea straight from the hot oil. However, he couldn't stop. His hands moved on their own. He had already fallen in love with the local food. Until then, everything was fine until he found himself at the police station again. The police officer asked if there were such serious problems in his country. The protagonist simply filled his belly and ran away. Kiryu tried to explain and said he simply forgot to pay. Another police officer remembered him and asked why the hunter was there. Then, at the exit of the police station, he said he shouldn't do that again. They would let it pass as a warning the first time. The protagonist lowered his head and said he would definitely pay next time. The police officer said he should wait a little. Before that, he had investigated and discovered that he didn't have the license. He handed over a pamphlet and said he advised visiting the testing center of the association. He didn't need to worry about money, it was free. Then the police officer shouted goodbye, saying he definitely should take the test. The protagonist looked at the pamphlet, confused, and thought what kind of awakening this was. It was some kind of concept that should be familiar to the people of Earth. Maybe he should try. It wasn't that far from here. After some time in the testing center building, Kiryu wondered if it was really there. It seemed he had been there before, and he seemed to have received a skill rating of F. As he remembered, he was already an awakened one with an F rating. Wu noticed they met again, and they greeted each other. She asked what brought him to the association and inquired about his documents. The protagonist felt anxious and thought he had deceived her last time. However, the memories returned in time. Now he was sure of what he was saying. Apologizing that last time he said all kinds of nonsense out of panic. He didn't have a hunter's license, as he had told her. She crossed her arms and now it made sense why he hadn't come back. Kiryu said he registered his awakening. He didn't receive a license because the result was a complete disappointment. She asked what he meant by that. The protagonist stated that he was an F rank. Wu Yun shouted in shock, then how could he defeat the rookie killer? The protagonist pointed out that it was just a coincidence. He collided with the wall. She looked at him with a confused expression at the words of that blonde guy. Wu then thought that the monster couldn't adapt, and was dragged up. Such cases had happened before, but when she saw him for the first time, he seemed so calm. As if he had already killed hundreds of such monsters. That guy was very suspicious. Why was he trying to hide his ranking? Such people are dangerous. It is likely that this person is one of them. She commented with a smile that it was really lucky. The bird was kind of dumb anyway. From what Kiryu understood, people use facial expressions to express their emotions. He should learn this to seem friendlier to others. Kiryu made a terrible face and said it was true that he had a lot of luck. Wu thought while staring at him in shock that something was wrong with his face. Cien should leave for now because of his strange attitude. She mentioned that she had something to give to the protagonist. She asked him to say his name and extend his hand right after. The protagonist happily thought if she was really giving money as a greeting. He asked why she was giving this to him. She said he left a body at the association, and she was giving him a reward. Kiryu thought that the cost of the food he had tried earlier was 8,000 won. The protagonist commented that he didn't think the creature was that expensive. That bird had fancy and expensive wings. So it cost that much, he asked. Cien Wu Yun said with crossed arms that it wasn't quite like that. It doesn't carry much value, but they were very lucky to find a magic stone in it. Nowadays, C-class stones sell for 2 million. The protagonist asked, confused, then why did he only receive 50,000 won? She said he should understand that damages were caused to the city during the capture. If the involved hunter hadn't escaped, they could have used legal immunity. He lamented this, and Wu Yun said it was okay, said goodbye, and left. Later, Kiryu squeezed the note in his hand and thought that this meant he lost 2 million. In its normal state, the monster wouldn't be more dangerous than an insect. The protagonist looked at the note and thought about how much money just for a monster's body. That's 75 bowls of soup. Money is necessary to survive, and he came to Earth in search of a happy life. It turns out he must earn as much money as possible. So it's time to become a hunter. Our little amoeba was determined. The protagonist considered his future until lunch to be bleak. The owner of the body is a beggar who must spend his savings on a bowl of soup. However, everything changed. Now Kiryu knows that hunters make good money. Kiryu thought this meant he would eat the best he could magic. Although his magical power isn't working now, he must find enough monsters. The protagonist heard a resident, and wondered which portal they were talking about. People were surprised and said it was the first time they had seen one in real life. Portals are always so large that they are places where hunting occurs. They are divided into rankings depending on the density of magical power. Along with this, the power of the monsters inside also increases. The protagonist looked at the door and thought it was some kind of unusual mana sample. He should check if monsters live there, thought the protagonist. Kiryu looked around and thought that in front of such a crowd of people, he wouldn't be able to enter. Kiryu wondered if there really was another portal nearby. The protagonist followed the magical power and thought he was getting closer to the source. After some time outside the city, the protagonist thought this was another door. After Kiryu tiredly said he thought he would die before he could level up. He spotted police tape and asked what that was. The crowd had a strange aesthetic. The protagonist asked, approaching the door, why they were decorating the plants with ribbons. Just before that, at the entrance of the door, Yun reported on the phone that they were already at the door. The manager asked if there were civilians at the location where he was. He noted that there was no one. The tape was also in place. The manager stated that these mutations would soon drive him crazy, and he lost count of how many times the rankings changed this month. Yun Cien said there was no need to worry, and that his team would immediately start an investigation. He immediately hung up the phone and told his allies it was time for them to enter. Yun Cien then said that the caves smelled terribly in the middle of summer. He looked at the device in his hand and saw that the magical density was at level D. Coleman noted that they were already used to this. When something happens, the ranking of the door jumps 2 levels. The team needs to resolve this quickly and then go have a drink. Yun Cien asked, looking around, if they should slow down. The team was going too fast. He asked why they should do that. Yun said, worried, that they should be careful and very cautious at that moment. Coleman patted his head and asked why he was so scared. Their team included Yun Cien himself, who was an A-class hunter. At that moment, Yun Cien was startled to see a golem behind his ally. Inside the dungeon, the protagonist felt a very strange vibe. He thought he had delved deep enough into this cave and had seen nothing. Suddenly, he felt a magical power that seemed to belong to a person. Then someone else entered through the gate and saw that it was a monster. At that moment, the golem struck ally Choi with its blow. Yun Cien froze in horror, looking at his ally's body. The swordsman asked in horror if he had been killed with one blow. The sorceress said fearfully that this couldn't be. Yun shouted that they needed to calm down and couldn't panic. If they didn't recover, they would all die there just like their ally. The two shouted that there was danger behind him. Cien blocked the golem's strike, but the creature attacked. He used his skills to strengthen his magical shield. Yun jumped and delivered a powerful blow to the golem, while the protagonist watched. He emphasized his defense, but a rank is still a strong hunter. The sorceress said he did well even against such a huge creature. He said they needed to take their ally's body, and then they would return. Suddenly, the golem rose and grabbed Yun with its stone hand, then pinned him to the ground. The golem tested the hunter's body in every possible way, and then threw him aside. The swordsman shouted his name, and the creature attacked, but he blocked its strike with his sword. In the next moment, he was surprised to think that his sword had broken. The golem hit him with all its strength, sending him flying against the opposite wall of the cave. The sorceress looked horrified at her ally, who showed no signs of life. The enormous stone creature was in front of her. The sorceress screamed in fear as the golem was about to attack. Cien protected her with his shield, trying to hold back his opponent. He ordered her to use binding magic now, or they wouldn't get out of there. He shouted for her to hurry and cast the spell quickly. Cien turned and saw the sorceress running away. He was pleading for her not to flee at that moment. At that instant, the golem knocked him down with its strike. Before losing consciousness, he thought that betrayal had caused an emptiness. He saw his whole life flash before his eyes, like the day he gained the A ability. How he had been bombarded with invitations from great guilds. He met good people, formed a team, and achieved good results. Everything was going well for him, but that was over. The protagonist threw a stone at the golem, and the creature looked at him. The creature began to approach him. The protagonist at least analyzed the golem. It is a clay creature that uses magic to move. In Alpha Ori, they performed a variety of functions, from construction work to military machines. These creatures played an important role in shaping their nation. He even has a degree in combat golem research. He observed that there were no more monsters here because this golem was on guard. Once the guard is awake, it won't be so easy to leave. The protagonist is forced to deal with this. The golem was about to attack. He couldn't use magic but had his skills. The golem attacked him furiously as if it were mad. The protagonist dodged its strike. The creature charged at him again, and the protagonist easily evaded. It used a crushing blow, but he jumped to the side at the last moment. After that, Kiryu thought he sounded confident, but in reality, it wasn't that simple. He could avoid the attacks of this creature due to its size and because it was clumsy. However, its body is very weak. The protagonist dodged the enemy's strike at the last moment. He began to deliver a series of blows that the protagonist successfully evaded. The creature hit the ground hard, and its hand got stuck. He thought this was exactly what he expected. Golems are easy to stop. The enormous stone in its hand is a sensor to recognize magical power. Just send an emergency stop command to the sensor. In terms of safety, only the owner or creator of the golem can do this. Kiryu used magic and thought that since it was very old, he could easily dismantle it. Fallen on the ground while climbing this creature, he hadn't completely shut it down. To shut it down, one must reach the core on its back, and the core needs to be removed. He didn't want to do this without tools but opened the back panel and ripped out its core. Yun tried to get up and remembered when his mother asked if he understood the risks. At that moment, he smiled and told her not to worry about him. It may not look so cool on the outside, but he is an A-level hunter. His mother said that this doesn't account for the dangers hunters face. The woman wants to respect his choice but is still worried. Cien took his mother's hands and declared that he would become a famous hunter. He promised that he would definitely succeed. She needed to believe in him at least this time and left. His mother smiled and said he should be careful at work. He opened his eyes and looked at the defeated golem, surprised by the scene. How could a human be here? Could he be the one who defeated the golem? He threw the golem's core on the ground, and Cien thought he was approaching it. The hunter still couldn't move normally. The protagonist stood by his side and asked, extending his hand if he needed help. After a while in a multi-story building, a sensationalist article about the incident at the gate was posted. A man asked why they had written such a headline. Sung commented that the article had nothing to do with the subject. Meanwhile, the frustrated manager questioned him about the incident. Knowing that someone else had defeated the golem was disappointing. Yun was shocked by his words. He continued to question whether he was stronger than someone who could not be unknown. No one recognized him. Even by description, he could be an unregistered hunter. Fortunately, the focus was on the monster. Otherwise, there would have been consequences. Yun interrupted, shouting and not allowing him to finish. He said it was for his own good, as that could harm his career. If an A-rank hunter showed weakness, he would immediately become a target. He questioned why he hadn't said that he had defeated the golem, and Yun stopped. Cien said, apologizing, that it was more important to remain honest. It was the best way to thank that hunter. The one who helped him didn't seem like someone involved in anything illegal, he said suspiciously. Otherwise, that hunter wouldn't have left him alive, and he wanted to return the favor. The director said he understood, adjusting his glasses. If he insisted so much, then he could leave, and he left. He adjusted himself in his chair and thought about the situation. If there was a strong hunter, then he would like to meet him at least once. In the protagonist's room, he looked at the phone and wondered what that was. Kiryu thought that people on Earth were amazing. He had accidentally unlocked his phone the night before and hadn't put it down until dawn. He asked if the information was freely available and felt like he was in heaven. Thanks to that Samsung Pocket, he had a lot of information. First, the gate he was at was not private property. Second, each gate has a level compatible with the entry. There should be management at the entrance for security reasons. Korea was a country that controlled this, so even entering the gate required permission. The licensing agency was the Korea Hunter Association. Third, Cien was not a thief trying to steal someone else's gate. Kiryu noted that this meant he needed to obtain a hunter license. The protagonist studied the list of things needed to obtain a license. An association staff member said they had completed the theoretical course and should wait. Our hero thought, yawning, that this was boring. He received a technological device specifically for the hunter area. Kiryu asked what it was, and the other participants asked, surprised. He looked at everyone, wondering if he had said something wrong. Other participants were shocked, as if he were an alien from another world. Kiryu, with a blank expression, wondered if he had been too obvious. The staff member said it was an analyzer that he would use and would explain how to use it. The protagonist thought it was interesting and seemed to use another type of technology. He asked if everyone had received their analyzers and that they should point them at the monsters. Our hero thought, looking at the monster, if just pointing the lens. The device said it was a poisonous butterfly Ephraim. Kiryu thought, looking closely, so people use devices to identify monsters. The staff member said this device had an item search function. He said it would help find valuable resources that he could try now. He used the analyzer on the staff member, and the device reported that nothing was detected. The protagonist thought that the device didn't work on people. Kiryu then used it on a nearby plant, which reported that it was a simple fruit. The protagonist thought he now understood how the item analysis function worked. Kiryu was perplexed, asking why this happened. It should analyze valuable resources, being able to detect only objects with mana. This means that the value of any resource is determined solely by that parameter. This is a simple method, although this device doesn't seem to have much accuracy. There are many valuable resources around that do not contain mana. The soil is a prime example in that situation. At first glance, it seems unimportant, but it is a rare substance for absorbing mana. Apparently, no one here knows about this magic, although that is strange. Here, where magical research is underdeveloped, this fact cannot be ignored. Why are the people unaware of this? He asked, placing his hand on his chin. He felt a light bulb go off in his head. Could this be the reason? He turned to the staff member and asked if he could answer a question. He asked if he could say when wizards began to appear in Korea. He said it was 7 years ago, and the opening of the dungeons was a shock to everyone. That was when the awakened began to appear all over the world. The protagonist thought if he was serious. Only 7 years had passed. Why was it such a short time? He said. Alpha Ori has a history of magic that dates back over 60,000 years. Now everything had become clear to him. All this time he had been surrounded by humans who knew nothing. That's why all their electronics only work on electricity and struggle with the internet. He looked at the device and thought that this planet is lagging behind in magical research. They compensated for this with technology that does not match the level of knowledge. He would never have believed that evolution could take such a strange turn. Kiryu thought as he picked up the soil in his hand. In any case, he could use an absorber that no one knows about. They went to a quieter place. The hunter wanted to repay and asked if there was any way to do so. He had been feeling restless about his disappearance since he saved his life. Kiryu thought he was just running away to avoid being caught by the police, but it would be a waste to refuse the help of an A rank. He took out his phone and told him he had an idea, which made the guy very happy. He pointed to a spot on the map and asked if he could go to the gate with him, and he agreed. The tense atmosphere saw the thoughtful expression on his face and asked what was wrong. The protagonist suggested that he speed up a bit. As they walked, the hunter kept looking at him and thought he couldn't believe it. He thought how could such an incredible hunter be F rank. He agreed and said it was a great honor to enter the gate with such a hunter. He said it would be a simple monster hunt, and he asked if he could learn something. Realizing he had high expectations, Kiryu sighed. Our protagonist said there was a misunderstanding and that he would like to clarify. The guy didn't understand what he was talking about. At that moment, he showed his license, saying that his skill was F rank. The hunter was shocked and couldn't believe what he was seeing. He could take him as his charge, thus allowing him to enter the portal. Cien still couldn't believe he was of such a low rank and remembered hearing something. Strong men and hunters are forcibly sent to suppress dungeon breaks, so there are rumors of people hiding their true rank to avoid pressure. For a moment, Yoon thought he was also hiding his rank. At that point, they had already arrived at the gate. Kiryu looked down and said he found it. In front of him was a huge crater on fire, where monsters were having fun. Yoon looked at them and said that was a flame spitter. Some time ago, there was a translation error in the analyzer. These monsters were originally discovered in Ohio. It was a bat engulfed in flames, so they wanted to insert it into the Pixie system as a fire bat. But due to a translation error, the name was adapted as Flamespitter. Kiryu noted that he knew a lot about the subject. Suddenly, the monsters heard their conversation and became very active. Yoon was distressed. A pillar of fire rose from the crater, and the bats began to fly everywhere. They surrounded the two hunters. Kiryu shoved his hand into his bag. Then Yunsung asked what he was so interested in. What was in that bag? He looked at the monsters flying directly toward them. Then he threw the dirt he had saved, making their wings immediately catch fire. They screamed loudly and fell at the same time. Kiryu told the hunter that this was a suitable item for situations like this. Yunsung looked at the monsters in surprise. He didn't want to distract him from the hunt but was curious about one thing. Why would he use items? Monsters of C rank can be captured by hand. The protagonist looked at him and thought, did this guy read my hunter license or not? From the top of A rank, you can't see how hard it is for lower ranks. He asked if he had ever thought about the nature of awakening itself. People lift a truck. They fill the barren land with water, literally changing the environment. But these abilities are not obtained through effort. They simply fell upon them. If there is no reason to appear, then there is no need for a reason to disappear. He believes that this power is deserved, so he does not intend to depend on it. He hoped he would believe in this nonsense. Yunsung's mouth dropped in shock. Hearing his wise speech, he began to cry and said he was absolutely right. Kiryu was even surprised that it worked. The hunter said that mutations becoming more unpredictable would be better to prepare. He took his hand and said he was looking for easy ways to train. Suddenly, a terrible thought occurred to him, and he covered his mouth with his hands. He said that people with a high level of awakening feel power and their instincts. There is practically no aura emanating from him, just like a fly. The protagonist looked at him in shock as he spoke. He thought he called the best mage of Alpha Ori a fly. How dare he? Yoon asked if he had trained his controls so much that he no longer transmitted anything. Meanwhile, Kiryu was trying to calm himself with that primitive kind. He confirmed the hunter's words, and they returned to the city. At the diner, Yoon asked if there was anything else to do. He could invite him. He said he could learn a lot from him, but the truth is that his team had fallen apart. Hunting alone was dangerous, and forming a new team was difficult. Our hero remembered that he probably hadn't gotten over the betrayal of his previous team. He agreed to invite him for an attack again, but warned him that he wouldn't save him. He had to protect himself. He didn't have the capacity to take care of him all the time. He decided to tell him what his mistake was during the golem incident. They continued talking, and the food had already run out. On their way out, Yun opened the door for him and asked how old he was. When they left the diner together, he said he was 22 years old. While he was taking out his ID, he wondered how old he was. Yunsung offered to exchange numbers with him. Then Kiryu showed his ID card, and he asked in surprise if he was 24 years old. Just a 2-year difference left him shocked. He seemed so calm and mature that he thought he was much older. His question made him think about his stay in this world. He had no memories of his studies. There were no contacts on the phone. Who was the owner of this body, and what was his life like? That same night, a hunter was relaxing at home. He was sitting on the couch watching TV, which was currently showing the news. The Hunter Association said it couldn't explain the increase in cases. Even high-level evaluators couldn't determine the cause of this phenomenon. For this reason, citizens' concerns are starting to grow. Time passed yesterday. While eating, Kiryu received a call from Yoon asking him to see something cool. He had a priority pass for the new gate. The protagonist was happy, although he didn't show it. In Korea, the new gate is only open for the research team, and today is the day of the opening for the public, which even had a rumor of a new plant. Who knows, maybe it's the key to restoring his magic. He could be close to the entrance, so he would just take a look and leave. They stopped nearby and saw the portal. He noticed there were many people. Yoon explained that they were more spectators while a group of people headed towards them. Suddenly, a loud sound was heard from a red sports car. Our hero looked in the direction of the noise. A luxurious red sports car stopped near them. A hunter named Kang Chang-ho got out, surprising everyone with his presence there. Kiryu asked who he was. Yoon Sung said he was an S-rank hunter. He looked closer and noticed that he had incredibly stable mana. Chang-ho noticed his intense gaze and looked at him with his bright green eyes. He realized that his eyes were different, and Yoon whispered that they were a rare item. Seeing the hunter approaching, he stopped gossiping and began to tremble at the base. Chang-ho approached Kiryu and asked his name. When he said it, he wanted to ask about his rank. Yoon nervously greeted the hunter, and said he was just his handler. Chang-ho shot him a disapproving look and said he wasn't talking to him. This made the boy really uncomfortable, and Kirios said he was F rank. This made Chang-ho laugh and look at him suspiciously as he felt his mana. Even severe lung damage does not reduce the amount of mana in the body. Apparently, this mage is at a high level that can sense the smallest details. He offered to show his license. Chang was surprised that someone with F rank would have such confidence to look into his eyes. He wanted to offer him something, but Yoon intervened, nervously pushing Kiryu. They said they came to admire, and it was time to go, or they would lose their place in line. After giving one last look at Chang-ho, he followed the boy. Yoon asked if he really didn't know who he was, saying he came from far away. The boy said he didn't have the best reputation, and he was curious about why. He recounted that he had a history of aggression. No one wants to enter the portal with a criminal, and his current rumors were terrible. Kiryu was curious about what happened and mentioned that he had a cousin. She entered the same gate as Chang-ho and was attacked by him. From what he heard, he loves to challenge strong awakeners. He covered his mouth to disguise his smile. After all, his friend was trying to protect him. He agreed to skip a day and suggested they look at the new plant tomorrow. Then suddenly, an idea came to mind. He stopped Yoon and asked about the dragon eyes, if they could be exchanged. He said that originally it was a small sphere he thinks he absorbed to use. Kiryu asked if it had dragon lungs and he decided to check. He pulled up information about it, and said it wasn't for sale right now but that it appears there. Kiryu looked at his phone and asked what the price was. He looked up the price of the lungs and found out it was 2.6 billion. The blonde guy remained quite calm about it. While in the taxi, he decided to read about Chang-ho. He couldn't believe that psychopaths like that could walk the streets without problems. He wondered if maybe he should ignore it. Suddenly, a noise from an engine was heard behind them. A red sports car crashed into the taxi from behind, pushing it forward. The driver barely managed to regain control and stopped. Afterward, he turned to his passenger and asked worriedly if he was okay. Kiryu, who had fallen from his seat, confirmed hesitantly. After that, the taxi driver jumped out of the car and angrily shouted where he got his license, telling him to get out of the car immediately. Chang-ho got out of the car and apologized with a smile, saying he hadn't driven in a long time, so he confused the accelerator with the brake. Our protagonist was quite surprised to see this guy. He approached, saying he would like to resolve this and offered to exchange contacts. Kiryu looked at him while the driver trembled at the base and asked him to pay for the repairs. Chang-ho gave him the money. He bowed deeply, thanking him for it, and Kiryu wondered how much was there. After that, the hunter handed over his phone and asked him to note down his contact. Our protagonist didn't understand what he was trying to say. Is this how Earthlings resolve issues with accidents? If he just needed his number, then he didn't mind. He noted his number in his phone and looked more closely at him. Chang-ho, the only son of a magnate, was born with a silver spoon and became a hunter. He once had a criminal record for assault even before his awakening. Everyone thought that with so much money he would find a good lawyer and avoid prison. But in the end, he ended up behind bars. There were many accounts testifying that he assaulted other people. But the biggest scandal was that his parents died during a dungeon break. He sold all the shares of his company right after that incident. People started spreading rumors because they didn't know when his awakening was. Some believed he killed his own parents for money, but it was never proven. Chan said it was strange for someone like him to waste time working as a manager. He went back to his car and sat down, saying he could offer a better job. He looked directly into his eyes and asked if he was interested. Although he didn't show interest, he said he didn't mind hearing him out. Chang-ho offered him a job where he would receive 80% of the profits and items from the gate. Kiryu was surprised and thought, what kind of absurd conditions are these? Is he serious? The S-rank hunter could definitely notice Kiryu's enormous mana reserves. It's likely that the potential of this body exceeds even that of an S-rank. When he gains the ability to use magic again, this planet will be under his control. He crossed his arms and said he would hardly be able to enter an S-rank gate. He didn't let him finish and said that considering his level, he would never take him there. This left him confused, and he asked if he hadn't approached because of his awakening. Chang-ho raised an eyebrow, confused, not understanding what he meant. In other words, he would become his sponsor. He apologized, explaining that he had misunderstood everything from the beginning, and the hunter asked if he would accept his proposal. Before agreeing, he decided to ask what his interest was in this deal, and the guy just smiled in response. Kiryu felt uneasy at that moment. He really missed Yun-sung. Soon he found him and told him everything, exclaiming in surprise. He confirmed and said he quickly left there, saying he had an appointment with him. In fact, he was almost certain that he caused that accident on purpose. Yun-sung pointed out that it seemed he was really looking for strong hunters, and if Chang-ho did something, he would definitely defend him. but he was thinking about what to do next. Yun asked if he had watched TV that morning. Last year, Korea ranked second in gate management. He said that the damages had decreased and that they would be able to mitigate this problem. Kiryu was also interested in gates, which remain an unknown concept. 7 years ago, monster gates and awakened beings appeared. The principles of magic are based on the use of mana from the planet's core. Unlike Alpha Uri, Earth has a layer of rock that makes it difficult for mana to reach the surface. But the gates that appeared became a kind of holes for mana to leak out, and some people were affected by them and became awakened. But the principles of the gates are not very clear, and inside them are monsters. Whose technology could this be if it is neither from Alpha Uri nor from Earth? While thinking about this, Yun tried to call him many times. He asked if Kiryu was okay. He apologized for being lost in thought. He was trying to put himself in the shoes of someone who could create all these gates. The reasons are unknown, but the monsters have a goal: to clean up in general. Magical items are like bait in a mousetrap. If the mice learned to escape, the man who said it wouldn't get angry. Yun commented that this made sense while Kiryu shuddered because he felt something. The energy was boiling beneath his feet like lava. He quickly looked around and, noticing bluish chains of light in the air, realized it was mana and ran towards Yun, pushing him away from himself. Watching the growing flashes, the boy became worried. A huge column of mana shot up into the sky, and Kiryu was sucked in. Soon he woke up, but in a different place. In front of him was a long white corridor, and he quickly looked around, wondering if this was a gate. He imagined that encountering a strong monster in a place like this would be equivalent to death. He needed to get out of here. But how would he escape with a body that couldn't even use simple magic? Walking further, he came across massive doors and a stone plaque with something written on it. Suddenly, footsteps were heard from both sides. He turned to see Changho and an unknown hunter. Both walked to the center of the room. Chan greeted the second hunter, who was Zhang Heizong, back from a trip. Kiryu thought they didn't seem like close friends and asked if they knew each other. The two hunters looked at him, confused. Changho asked if he didn't know him. He replied in his mind that he didn't. Changho mockingly said he should post more stories like Virginia. He told Kiryu that he was an S-rank hunter and also one of the best in Korea. He didn't expect him to be such an important person. He said that everyone generally calls him a national hero, but he wouldn't say anything more. He introduced them, and Kiryu, noticing his gaze, wondered why he was looking. Heizong asked if everyone was suddenly sucked in here. Both nodded, and he pressed the button on his bracelet. Calling up the system window, Kiryu looked and thought it was an elegant analyzer. The bracelet showed him information about where they were, in an EX gate. Kiryu remembered that he once read about this rank and decided to search for information online. But his phone wasn't working. Changho checked his phone, and it didn't work either. If they didn't get out of there, the phone would die. Heizong noticed there was something written on the slab. A symbol of true faith would be the key. Since they could only pass through this door in front of them, they began to work. Heizong pressed against the door with both hands but couldn't open it. Heizong asked for Changho's help, who reluctantly agreed. Then he approached him, and Heizong's hand caught fire, and the flames spread. Changho, in turn, used his abilities and covered the door with all his strength. Kiryu was very surprised. S-rank mages are truly on another level. These are people endowed with exceptional talent and monstrous abilities. However, nothing changed. Their efforts were in vain. Changho sighed and pointed out that brute force wouldn't help here. Kiryu turned and looked at the lion statue and said they had another option. The hunters approached it, and Changho, looking at the lion's mouth, turned to the guys with a smile and said, "How about putting your hand inside the mouth?" They remained silent. Kiryu thought they would be stuck. Since they were sucked in here, they had no supplies with them, meaning they were trapped. Unexpectedly for him, Heizong put his hand in the lion's mouth, and a roaring sound echoed in the room. The stone door opened. They were about to move forward, but Kiryu noticed Heizong looking at his hand with concern and asked if something was wrong. He showed the marks left by the teeth and said he had drunk his tomato juice. He even tried to pull his hand out due to the unexpected pain, but the statue held on tight. For a moment, he even thought about cutting it off. Changho did not react to this and suggested they move quickly. Kiryu, looking at him, realized he had a bad feeling. They walked down the white corridor and saw they were back in the same room. Changho made an unsatisfied expression. There was also a lion statue in the room. Heizong pushed him with his shoulder, moving forward, and shoved his hand into his mouth. The doors opened, but they found themselves in the same room again. Kiryu wondered if they were doing the right thing. Heizong asked if Changho could open the next door, and he questioned why it was him. He said that the absorbed blood dose varies. The first was small, but the second made him feel a bit unwell. If the dose increases each time, then it would be better if each one was a little. Changho said he was fine so far, so why not continue? His words made Heizong's calm expression change. He said unhappily that he could consider this a refusal to cooperate. The boy smiled and mocked, asking if he knew his rank. Heizong said he didn't care, put his hand on his sword, and asked him to cooperate. Chang-ho challengingly asked what would happen if he refused. Kiryu tried to intervene in the fight, but Chang-ho interrupted him. If they kept opening the doors, there was a risk of encountering the statue itself. He should at least decide when he would do this, and that sounded fairer. Moreover, there was another hunter with them. Why didn't he ask? This made Kiryu very nervous because the survival rate is about 60%. They usually don't have monsters, but that doesn't mean they are safe. A labyrinth that can only be advanced after offering blood. In other words, passing through the gate requires the sacrifice of one of the team members. It seems he got himself into a very bad situation. Haezong asked if he was suggesting to push the work to a level F. He wanted to say something more but stopped upon hearing a growl. The three turned around quickly. They saw a black wolf coming out of the hallway, showing its teeth at them. Kiryu didn't expect there to be monsters wandering around. At that moment, the wolf growled and then jumped at him. He covered his face with his hands in fear, but Haezong came to his rescue in time. He lunged forward and pierced his opponent with a fire blade in a leap. When he landed and turned around, the wolf had already disappeared. Kiryu was very surprised and wanted to know about his abilities and his partner beside him. But suddenly he noticed a wolf approaching quickly from behind him. It intended to attack Chang-ho. When it was about to leap onto him, our protagonist alerted him to the danger. He immediately turned, attacked, and crushed the monster. He was stunned by his incredible strength. His awakening gave him a physical boost. After dealing with the monster, the boy said he wasn't as strong as he thought. Haezong said it was too early for them to relax and advised them to look over there. There were drawings on the wall in front of them. Then black wolves began to emerge from there, gradually forming a huge pack. They ran into the room, surrounding the hunters and began to approach. Haezong said they weren't very strong, just numerous, so it would get a bit boring. He asked Chang-ho to take care of those behind him. He replied with a smile and said to take care of his own work. After that, the fight began. The wolves advanced to attack, and the hunters took combat stances. As soon as they got close to them, the boys immediately dealt with them. Chang-ho punched the air, releasing energy that quickly dealt with the opponents. But there were still many wolves, and they began to attack again. Haezong surrounded himself with flames and made several quick cuts with his sword. Kiryu watched him, mouth agape. Now he understood what the ranks were. Meanwhile, Haezong was already starting to get tired. There were more wolves than he thought, and due to blood loss, he felt weak. He wouldn't last much longer. He looked at the statue and noticed its eyes were glowing. And then an idea occurred to him. While he thought about it, a wolf jumped at him from behind and destroyed the enemy. He had realized what was happening there. While he thought about his idea, they realized they still had many around. After watching their fight, Kiryu began to understand the power of the ranks. Finally, they dealt with all the opponents in an instant. Maybe when he returns, his magic won't be so easy to govern the earth. Haezong called the two and told them to look at the lion. Its eyes were shining. There is a time limit, and if you don't give your blood in time, monsters appear. At that moment, a wolf appeared on the wall behind him. Kiryu, realizing it, wanted to attack the hunter. He called his attention with concern while the wolf was already on top of him. He immediately reacted, piercing the beast's throat with a fire sword. Chang-ho asked if that meant they had a limit. A huge pack of monsters came running directly toward Kiryu. Noticing this, Haezong ran to defend him. Chang-ho turned and ran towards the statue. While his colleague dealt with the monsters, he reached the statue and placed his hand on it. As soon as he began to absorb its blood, all the monsters immediately evaporated. Kiryu thought that he didn't want to help while Chang asked who would be next. Haezong replied that they would do it in turns. They didn't know if a Frank's body could withstand this. Because of his words, he understood why he was called a national hero. Due to his F level, he spares and protects him because he fears he won't endure it. He even felt a bit of guilt. They walked to the next room, but Haezong was visibly weak. His breathing was heavy, and cold sweat was running down his body. When he held his head, Kiryu asked worriedly if he was okay. He said he was fine and that they were almost at the exit. Kiryu noticed worriedly that his face was even paler. Fortunately, it was Chang-ho's turn. Just when he thought that, Chang-ho suggested they stop for a minute. They had no guarantee that the exit would be behind those doors, so why not backtrack and search more? Haezong exclaimed with discontent that he thought he was stalling. The standard scenario for the EX gate is to meet all the conditions, and he knows that. He shouted if he was planning to attack him during the battle like he did with Choi Jin. He remained silent, and the boy ordered him to stop stalling and open the doors. Chang said he would open the door and that he needed to relax a bit because he was too tense. He said he was misunderstanding everything. What happened to her was an accident. He is not a psychopath who blindly attacks his companions. He placed his hand on the statue and said he knew it was hard to trust him. With his arm on the statue, he asked him to think and that he would do it for someone else. Kiryu noticed that he seemed more reasonable than he thought. Could it be that Fofocalizando got the gossip wrong? He wondered. Changho felt uneasy with so much tomato juice that came out and tried to pull his hand away. As soon as he did that, Haezong asked worriedly if he was okay. He said not to worry about it, he had brought healing potions. Haezong said to continue. If there was no other way, they would have to find another way. Watching the hunter pull a potion from his bag, he thought they should support him. His thoughts silenced when he saw Changho smashing the potion on his head. He immediately passed out and fell to the ground. Changho was surprised to see that it worked even on an S rank. Our hero looked at him in shock and asked what the hell he was doing. The crazy one asked if he had ever heard of the Iron Maiden Gate. You can only save yourself after sacrificing a hunter. Kiryu was shocked to realize that he wanted to sacrifice Haezong. Changho wouldn't want to bet his life on such low survival expectations. He picked up Haezong and threw his arm over his shoulder, and Kiryu thought there was logic in his words. They would need a scapegoat. If they were to sacrifice someone, it would be better to plan for an S rank. But why choose an S rank and not him? Something wasn't right. Changho wanted to place Haezong's hand in the lion's mouth, but our hero intervened. The hunter smiled and asked if he had gained confidence. He let him just stay quiet. He would do it right and get out of here alive. Realizing he couldn't argue, he began to think about how to save Haezong. Changho said this test would end soon. The enormous doors opened, and a beam of blue light came from inside. In front of them was a room with a statue of a woman and an open passage. They were surprised by the scene and the exit clearly in front of them. Changho, not believing his eyes, said that this couldn't be. The hero walked towards the statue while Changho was sure he needed a victim. He knocked out Haezong because if he woke up, he would be very unhappy, and he would have problems. Kiryu told him that the statue had a reward. Then he took the gold bracelet. This is a magical item. He told the hunter that he would need this when he apologized to Haezong. He asked if he should finish him off there while the protagonist was in disbelief. Changho sat him on the ground, saying that attacking the best hunter in the country wasn't that easy. He looked, saying that the body would disappear along with the dungeon. But what about the witnesses? He didn't think Kiryu had a reason to stay quiet about the murder. He nervously began to ask if he would drag him there too. He explained why he would do that instead of asking for a favor. He placed his hand on his shoulder and asked if he could take the blame for the situation. Changho has an unusual vision, but this is due to the dragon eyes. These eyes have many functions, one of them being the ability to measure the level of awakening. With such eyes, he could see any detail up to the moment he met Kiryu. He looked closely at him and wondered if there was something wrong with his eyes. Kiryu was exuding a strange energy, something he had never seen before. The amount wasn't very large, but perhaps this guy had obtained a skill. He approached him and asked his name and rank, thinking he was a liar. If he were an ordinary F rank, he would never be able to look him in the eyes. To ordinary people or low-level awakened ones, they were like enormous beasts. Even a simple trip to the market became a test for him. The fact that Hunter Kiryu was an F rank was absurd, so he decided to provoke him. Whether it was a sudden accident or an offer, his face never showed emotion. This indifference seemed extremely pleasant to him. At that moment, he asked him to say that he was the one who knocked out Haezong. He couldn't prove anything, even if he remembered something. All he needed to say was that there had been a conflict between the hunters. This made him wonder what would happen if he refused, and the guy told him he would take him to the depths then. He looked closely at him and thought that, to be honest, he could resolve all the problems right there. But he wondered what kind of abilities he was hiding. He would definitely react to such a stupid threat. But when Kiryu agreed so easily, he was very surprised. He confirmed this with confusion and wondered why he agreed so easily. There was no fear on his face. It didn't seem like he was scared of his threat. He was trying to avoid conflicts. As Kiryu understood everything, he suggested they leave that dungeon. Both headed for the exit, and he was happy to have survived there. They finally emerged, and Kiryu was immediately dazzled by the sunlight. In front of them, behind the fences, was a huge crowd of curious onlookers and reporters. They were very excited to finally see the hunter who came out of the third exit. The reporters asked him to look at the camera and began to ask various questions. One of them rushed forward, asking how many hunters were inside. He thought about it for a while and then looked, seeing so many gates. At that moment, Changho came out of another exit, carrying Haezong on his back. The reporters' attention immediately turned to them, especially to Haezong. Changho wasn't in a hurry to answer their questions. A girl from the association approached him to find out the circumstances. She had many questions, but the priority was to know what happened to Haezong. He looked at Kiryu and said that during the conflict, that guy knocked out Haezong. He looked at him and thought with displeasure that he was lying right after coming out. After that, the girl from the association pointed and exclaimed that this was absurd. How could a top ranker lose to a hunter she had never seen before? Kiryu was already happy that at least the association's team had common sense. He didn't like that very much and smiled maliciously, after which he shot a glance. His gaze made him feel uneasy. He realized he had no choice. He drew the attention of the association staff and declared that it was true. This news shocked everyone present, but he said he would apologize. The girl looked at him in shock and said that if he wasn't another S rank, then it was impossible. Chang-ho said she was wrong to accuse him. Suddenly, one of the reporters rushed forward intending to ask a question. They bombarded Kiryu with questions about whether he could really knock him out. Microphones were extended, and he replied that he was forced to do it. Haesung woke up, and the news he saw left him very irritated. Yun-sung invites the protagonist to dinner. Although they had excluded the news, he had seen it and wanted to know the truth. Yun asks if he really knocked out John Haesung. The protagonist brings food to his mouth, preparing to respond. He says it was more or less what happened, and Yun is shocked. Yun asks about rank X, if he was okay in general. When he finishes speaking, the protagonist's phone rings. He answers the phone and feels the meal lose its taste, because the caller is none other than Haesung. He responds politely while gesturing for his friend to eat without him. He then steps away to take the call, leaving Yun sitting alone. Our hero wonders how to apologize. The purpose of Haesung's call is simple, to know what happened at that portal. The incident happened very quickly, and he only remembered flashes. He suspects it was Chang-ho who attacked him, but he's not sure. He only remembers the blow and a memory of the protagonist's cold eyes. Now he asks the protagonist to explain, and our hero starts to feel chills. He should simply confess that Chang-ho threatened him to take the blame. He was confused by all the news. Should he say that he was manipulated? Remembering that Haesung is called a national hero for being the greatest in exploring portals. What guarantees that this workaholic will protect him from Chang-ho? He takes responsibility and apologizes for what happened. He explains that he was worried he was trying too hard. As an apology, he will give him the reward from the dungeon. This simple statement makes Haesung's veins bulge. Haesung exclaims that he could have just talked to him and not left him unconscious. By becoming unconscious in a place that requires a sacrifice, he wouldn't have good intentions. John concludes that he knows Chang-ho and his intentions and asks if he is included in this. He asks if he is really an F-rank hunter, and Kiryu falls silent. Our hero tries to convince him that he had special circumstances, but John interrupts him. Finally, John looks out the window and says he will keep an eye on him. Without waiting for the protagonist to explain further, he hangs up the phone. John apologizes to his assistant, who has been waiting nearby for some time. She then hands over all the information he requested. She explained that the association had taken the news off the air. However, many people had already read it and were commenting on it. The assistant suggests that he ignore those comments. Now the whole world knows about the hunters, and this leaves them worried. He also investigated the protagonist's identity. He is only an F rank. John thought so too, but if that were the case, why did Chang-ho let him live? There would be no need to threaten him to take the blame, but he could feel that his eyes were not of this world. Since his awakening, he had never felt that sensation. He has reasons to suspect that the other's ranking is false. He asks his assistant to contact the association to redo this test. The abilities used by the awakened are collectively called abilities. One learns at least one ability at the moment of awakening, plus magic. However, on this planet, one can only use one type of magic, the one they awakened with. Their only way to use another elemental magic is to spend skill stones. But for the protagonist, it is different. He has already reset all types of magic before reincarnating. As long as the conditions are met, he can use all the magic of Earth. But the pulmonary problems of this body prevent the fusion of mana. To solve this problem, he discovered a method. He wants to use a magic amplifier, and will only use small magic for that. But the spatial gate that contains the necessary materials is controlled by the magic tower. Now the protagonist is outside the magic tower. He is immediately rejected by the staff because he came without an appointment. Our protagonist says he has an appointment, and that he scheduled it. The employee scoffs as if he would let an F rank have that opportunity. However, Yun-sung suddenly appears. He had asked for help because of his level. It would be easier to make the meeting. Upon seeing Yun, the previously impatient member transforms, being his fan. The two start chatting excitedly, and Yun explains that he has a scheduled meeting. The protagonist enters the magic tower without problems, and the staff even apologizes for this. They arrive at the reception to confirm the appointment, and the reception has already been notified. They are informed that their representative is on the top floor and are instructed to go up. But when the elevator reaches the 60th floor, the scene before them frightens the two men. The protagonist looks at the scene with cold sweat, and something seems wrong here. They had pressed the button for the 60th floor but arrived at the second floor. The protagonist thought the elevator was broken but heard Yun's explanation. In fact, this was a test from the guild leader. The representative of the magic tower is the guild leader, one of the strongest. Any visitor who wants to see her must go through a maze challenge. Therefore, they would have to find the top floor on their own. Upon hearing this, the protagonist decides to use the stairs. However, it is evident that things are not that simple. After the second floor, what appears is an underground parking lot. It turns out that as soon as you open the door, you are connected to an inexplicable space. The two kept going around and around. The protagonist asks how many people have passed this test. Except for a few high-level teams, not even the staff knows the way. Making visitors go through a maze is truly eccentric, but this maze is very well made. The protagonist is eager to meet the one who created it, as it gives a nostalgic feeling. The two return to the elevator door, and Yun wonders what they should do. The protagonist places his hand on the elevator door to feel it carefully. Even though his current body is useless, there are still things he can do. Feeling a different energy, he tells Yun that he has found the way. Upon hearing this, Yun's eyes widen, and he asks how they will get there. First, the protagonist shows by pressing the elevator button. Then he presses the button for the upper floor from the outside. Finally, he steps back. He waits for the doors to close, gesturing for Yun to do the same. Then the protagonist takes several steps back. Next, he delivers a strong kick to the elevator doors. Under the tremendous force, the doors are broken open, revealing an empty space. Yun, sweating cold, asks why he did that, and the hero jumps. He follows him, and when they reach the ground, they hear a voice. Then they see a young woman with stunning red hair turn around. The woman informs them that they were the fastest to arrive there. She didn't expect them to find the hidden passage, but their luck ends here. From now on, they would be in front of the tower leader Esther. She invites them to sit down, and Yun introduces her to his friend. She comments that she left the challenge at a hard level, and is intrigued by how they solved it. He then introduces himself, and Esther smiles at the protagonist. She has been eager to meet him since they share the same ability. As an outsider, he doesn't understand what she means. He looks confused at his friend beside him, waiting for an explanation. It turns out that Esther believes she has awakened a rare ability that few people possess. Yun explains to the protagonist that Esther has rare curse abilities. The protagonist remembers that she is someone who kills monsters using various effects. She only recently developed magic, and few can use complex spells. Most are like John and Chang Ho, relying purely on brute strength. Even defensive and recovery types like Yun are rare. Users of special abilities like assessment and curses are uncommon. The protagonist bluffs and apologizes for not recognizing her. He is low profile and doesn't understand anything. Esther laughs and says that their hero must have been very busy with everything happening. But enough small talk. Yun said that you wanted to use the portal. The protagonist explains that Yun only made the nomination because his opposition was very low. Esther asks the protagonist what his rank is. Esther is a bit surprised by the F ranking, but she is not too shocked. Assessors are usually like that, although this value is low. Moreover, Esther is curious to know why the protagonist wanted to enter this portal. If he intends to collect materials from the tree, that would be bothersome. He promises that he will not touch the tree area, but even so, she cannot let him enter. After all, monopolizing a space portal requires substantial funding. She is not running a charity. If he really wanted access, he should have come personally and organized negotiations between guilds. That's why she reminds the protagonist not to try to take advantage and that she hates haggling. The protagonist feels that he is showing off. It's just a low-level dungeon. They probably don't recognize any of the good resources inside. The hero apologizes and says that he has no guild. Yun interrupts and says that he works alone. He adds that he has never worked as an assessor, and the only one he knows is Yun. This is just a personal request. No guild will benefit from this. He is about to present his conditions. He never expected to enter for free. But before he can finish, Esther suddenly interrupts. The cold and distant Esther now appears excited. Her hair dances with emotion, and she looks at him as if he were her new prey. Her expression makes the protagonist start to sweat cold. He hasn't even offered his conditions. What is happening? Esther concludes that he is an unaffiliated agent and makes a proposal. She asks him to enter the tower, and she would hire him immediately. This space gate is nothing, and I will give it for free if you come. Inside, he is ecstatic about the offer. Yun explains that large guilds like the Magic Tower have a great circulation of crystals. The equipment cannot check the purity of the crystal with the naked eye. To avoid being deceived, they need assessors during transactions. Suddenly, Esther extends her hand and announces a signing bonus of 5 billion. Hearing this, the protagonist is shocked by her generosity and asks what she said. She retorts, asking if he found it little and if the guilds of the two sisters had made another proposal. Meanwhile, the protagonist is thinking about how many meals he could buy, and explains that they hired many excellent assessors, so it will be heavy. The protagonist asks if she really wants him on her team. Esther says of course and smiles at him. At that moment, the protagonist is truly tempted. There is no need to fight and explore space gates, just assess the materials. He is almost ready to agree next, but Esther completes. He would only need to work 4 days a week. However, this single statement destroys the protagonist's fantasy. The words work deeply, provoking his sensitive nerves. I reincarnated to no longer be a CLT employee, and they are trying to hire me again. Having a job means working overtime and reporting to supervisors. Just thinking about it gives the protagonist a headache. Esther produces his highest paid contract. Even the A-rank hunter is shocked, unaware that the protagonist has already lowered his head in disappointment. Then his low voice says, "I'm sorry, but forget this offer." Upon hearing this, Esther was stunned. "How much money do you want?" The protagonist explains that it's not about money. He simply does not want to join any guild. Esther looks directly into his eyes, confirming that this is his true intention. "Rejecting my offer means you will spend a large sum to enter the portal." The protagonist is certainly prepared and asks to make a deal with her. He has knowledge of a substance that can make buildings armored. It can even immunize against any ability and absorb mana. Not even monster attacks will knock him down as he moves toward the window. The protagonist believes this is more than enough as an entry fee. Bored with his talk, Esther says that if the substance works, it's a deal. The protagonist directly pulls out a bag of sand from his pocket. Only he knew where to find it, and could provide as much as she wanted. Yun remembered it was the same sand he used on the bats. However, using this as a condition seems unprofitable. In any case, it's better to gain a bit of goodwill, and Esther curiously takes the sand. She asks the protagonist if he made a deal with others to enter this junk. Earlier, she said her space portal was valuable. Now she calls it junk. While they discuss, her assistant enters the room. The protagonist says he considers this a mutual benefit between us. Yun and Kiryu leave, and Esther has her coffee, but her assistant thinks the representative seems a bit unhappy. Esther says it's not unhappiness, she just made a joke with the client. Startled and in mother mode, she says she promised never to do that again. Esther seems unconcerned. It's just a scary curse. The assistant asks what, and she replies that she made him sneeze for 30 seconds. She activated her ability. That man should have sneezed but just looked at her. At that moment, his eyes were filled with intent. Esther was scared, and he definitely noticed. Curses affect the highest rank level from which this man came. The test results of the sand arrive. It really has absorption properties. The assistants speculate that the protagonist wanted to make a good impression. She then asks for the protagonist's profile. She wants to see his complete record. The protagonist is now hunched in a corner, continuously vomiting. He will forever remember this welcome coffee. Before, he had heard it was prepared for guests, so he drank it without suspicion. And he almost spat it out because it tasted exactly like industrial glue from Alpha Yuri. This drink is special for special guests, and he looked into Esther's eyes, while Esther mistook his gaze for an intent to kill. Little did she know that the protagonist's body is controlled by a cute amoeba. Unless someone's magic is more powerful, no one can take control from him. Even the curse of an S-rank hunter is no exception. Recovered, the protagonist buys mineral water to rinse his mouth. Yun asks about the item he passed to Esther. He didn't know such a substance could extinguish the bats and make buildings armored. He speculates that the protagonist doesn't like the association, but he rebuts. He has no feelings regarding the association. He explains that he just wanted to make a good impression on Esther. This simple statement surprised Yun a lot, who asks if Esther was his type. Yun asks our hero what he is trying to gain from this. The next day, Kiryu wakes up. He feels his body swollen. He looks to the side and checks if an artifact is drying. He entered Esther's space portal. The protagonist recalls that they were facing winged Zei monsters. Yun prepared to attack that horde. Thanks to the hunter, everything was cleared in one move. Kiryu managed to reach his goal quickly, fairy-type wings, and he thanked Yun. In his apartment, he prepares his ingredients. While checking his plan to reclaim his powers, he hears a noise. He went to the fridge because it was time for his snack. Just as he was about to grab it, he hears a sound coming from the door. Confused, he looks at the door and thinks, "If it's someone from my family, help me, God." Two bearded and strong security guards are outside. Even if it were someone he knew, things would get complicated. An agent greets him while identifying herself as a hunter. She shows her badge and asks if they could talk for a minute. The agent orders him to leave his apartment, and Kiryu asks what brings her there. She first apologizes for not giving notice, but due to regulations she must act this way. She explains the reason for visiting his residence. They received a report that Kiryu was falsifying his license. Still very confused, she asks him to follow her to retake the test. She asks if he wants to be taken by force, and the security guard's eyes widen. Once again, our hero is going to miss snack time. The security guard drives the car very fast. The reason Cien Yun is taking him like this goes back a few weeks. Since the incident with the rookie killer, she suspected he was committing fraud. She checked his record and indeed saw that he had an F rank. Digging deeper, she saw on the computer that he had only entered one dungeon. For someone who defeated a high-skill monster, something didn't add up. This type of person could be dangerous. What could he do to other hunters? She filled out a suspect document because she couldn't investigate further. After a few days, a rumor surfaced that Kiryu had erased an S-rank hunter. But if even the hero of the homeland suspects him, there must be something fishy going on. There's no other story. He was indeed hiding his rank. She expected him to run, but surprisingly, he cooperated. His house seemed small and old for someone with that kind of rank. Kiryu interrupted her thoughts by asking about the cost of this operation. She replied that it costs 480,000 wands if the rank is manipulated. If it remains the same, he won't have to pay anything. Our amoeba looked at her and sighed while others took the test in the room. She identified that the devices used there can't really check the powers. For a moment, he felt comfortable as if those faulty devices would do something. Soon called him and said they would use another type of device, and he was shocked. He followed her, sweating cold as she explained about the re-evaluation. Soon said he had already had opportunities to revalidate, and now it was his time. The two security guards held him by the arms towards the machine. While Yun explained that he didn't need to remove anything metal, they placed him in the machine. In moments, the results were ready while our hero trembled at the base. Soon asked if he was aware of what happens to people of that type. Worried about the test result, he wondered if his enormous mana would show up. The agent checked the collected data and was soon shocked. There was no evidence of any change in the data. Kiryu, perplexed by the information, saw that his value had increased slightly, but that would be normal. He asked the agent if he would be able to continue rising, but she said no, only little by little. He stood still and thought, could it be that I didn't have mana all this time? He clenched his hands and understood the reason for his failure was that his tank had nothing. But why? When he passed by the golem, did he not see it and only attack Yun's team? It was because he never recognized it as an intruder. Our hero starts to panic, and the agent looks at him worried. He looks at the ground and realizes that his reincarnation was a disaster. Leaving the office, he walks through the streets with his head full. At one moment, he looks back. The agent asks if he doesn't need to go to the hospital as there could be side effects. He thanks her but says he is fine. Worried, she says that his expression has been bad since he took the test. She asks how she knew he was home. She reveals that her awakening is a skill that allows her to see the traces of people. When she tries to explain more about it, Kiryu exclaims and tells her to wait a moment. They, shocked, find a terrible scene. Cien, startled, fixes her gaze on the street for a moment. They see a raccoon that was recently dragged by a car. This kind of thing happens a lot around there. Kiryu, curious, crouches down to take a look. He grabs the raccoon by the ears and lifts it while feeling sorry for the animal. He hugs it while Cien, shocked by the scene, says he can wash his hands later. He says goodbye and carries the raccoon in his arms. The protagonist said he was close to his house, and Cien wishes him a safe return. In Alpha, there are two types of golems, mineral and organic. One uses stones, and the other uses animal bodies. In short, he found a good test. Our amoeba is happy to find this organic sample for free. Cien stares at him as he leaves and remarks that surprisingly, he has a cute side. At night in Kiryu's house, he prepares to test his ingredients. He tries to mix them but is struggling. He thinks it's hard to do without his tools. Your phone rings, interrupting your train of thought. Already stressed, he wonders who would be calling at this hour. He made a mistake by adding his analytical skills to his profile. Everyone calls him talking about job offers. Our hero is too tired to respond. It was quite a day. Before lying down, he receives another notification. A chocolate event was going to happen nearby. Confused by the announcement, he set out to find out more about the event. Walking calmly through the streets at night, he noticed the reminder said it was made especially for him. Ignoring it would be rude. Suddenly, a mysterious black van appeared in front of the protagonist. Innocently, he approached. Apparently, he doesn't watch Criminal Minds. He looked at the windows of the vehicle and wondered why it was parked there. The van's door opened, and a guy dressed all in black stepped out. As he approached the protagonist, he overpowered him from behind. Almost losing consciousness, he didn't understand what was happening. Before passing out, he saw a dark face looking at him. He woke up with his hands tied and a blindfold. He didn't know where he was. He thought about how terrifying Earth is, but was interrupted by voices. He heard someone asking if he was the F-rank guy, and another person replied yes. A whirlwind of questions flooded his mind about why he was attacked. Two henchmen appeared talking, and it seemed they were about to conclude the delivery deadline. One of them told his friend not to leave any trace. Someone seemed to arrive to talk to the gang leader. The leader introduced the VIP client, who wished everyone a good evening. The VIP was going to check the merchandise, aka our hero. A wicked smile appeared as he asked if Kiryu was awake. They approached him and removed the bandana from his face. When the protagonist looked, it was Chang-ho with his green eyes. Kiryu asked what he was doing there, and the rival said he would explain. There was a rumor about a new hunter who handled Esther's challenge well, but the problem was that his rank was F. This made him vulnerable to criminals. He already had people wanting to hide the capabilities of his equipment. They knew how expensive this type of contract was, but kidnapping made it cheaper. Those with low rank are vulnerable to brainwashing, becoming loyal. Chang-ho had already bought people there before. The protagonist asked if he wasn't going to help him, and he simply walked away. As an order, he told them to take Kiryu upstairs. Shaking and sweating cold, he thought, "Why did I reincarnate?" 2 guys threw him to the ground with an impact. One of them noticed he was without a blindfold, but it didn't matter since he was going to be knocked out. Kiryu looked back, surprised. Alone, he wondered if there was any reason to leave him there. The protagonist felt something different. A floral and sweet odor spread through the environment as he looked to see where it was coming from. It could be a magical artifact that induces sleep, but it didn't matter. He needed to escape. It wouldn't work on a great mage like him. Our protagonist untied his shoelace and took one end with his teeth. He began to rub it against what he was tied to. He managed to create sparks and eventually freed himself. Even though he was immune to brainwashing, being sold was quite dangerous. He put his hand in his pocket searching for his phone but couldn't find it. He wondered what he could use to get out of there. He looked at the magical artifact and had an idea. 2 guards outside were calmly at their posts. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise. A yellow smoke along with a light hindered their vision. They immediately covered their noses. Kiryu struck one of them with the artifact while the other stood perplexed. Almost fainting, he tried to ask about it, but sleep interrupted him. He felt cold, and as he inhaled more of the scent, he fell. Kiryu was outside with the artifact in hand, and the guards were counting sheep. That object was indeed effective. He wanted to escape as quickly as possible but stumbled upon a phone. The henchman had dropped it, and Kiryu picked it up. He dialed the emergency number and waited for the call. The police answered the call, and the hero tried to explain the situation. The call was failing no matter what he tried. He thought the phone was broken, so he decided to send a message to the number. An automatic message was his response. He tried again, and the same message was sent. The protagonist became restless, wondering if the message was really sent. Then he sent a message to his friend. He had contacted help, grabbed the artifact, and began to escape. 2 other henchmen appeared on the scene. They were shocked by what they saw at the end of the corridor. A beam of light along with mysterious smoke emerged from there. One of them wondered, "Who is that guy?" As the protagonist spun the artifact, heading directly toward them, he prepared to launch the artifact. With a simple movement, he attacked. Hitting one of them, he knocks him out, and the other is left shocked. Very nervous, he realizes it's the guy they kidnapped. At that moment, he grabs the artifact and shoves it in his face. The henchman falls backward, some tomato juice coming out of his nose. The protagonist thought it would be easy thanks to the artifact. He looks around and searches for an exit. Suddenly, he feels something. A large spatial portal was right in the center of a wall. He realizes he can use it to escape. However, the rest of the henchmen find him. As he heads toward the portal, he descends the stairs. He feels his legs give out, and he notices that the action hasn't even started yet. One of the henchmen shows where he went. Surprised, they wonder how he managed to escape. At that moment, they notice he is holding something. Our hero holds the artifact and has an idea. He swings the object for better momentum. The rivals try to cover their mouths and noses to avoid the smell. Kiryu throws the artifact at them once again. However, a hand interrupts the movement. One of them managed to grab the artifact in his hands. As he advances toward our protagonist, he is hit in the neck and becomes disoriented. The rival says that he usually doesn't mess with the merchandise, but today he would make an exception. Kiryu lowers his arms and delivers a knee to the chin. He falls completely unconscious and in a lot of pain. Our hero, sitting on the ground, observes the scene. He complains that everything is very difficult while his rival is completely out cold on the ground. At that moment, he notices something inside the artifact. It seemed that the incense was running out. He concluded that from then on, nothing would be easy, but he noticed one of the portals behind him. He could feel the energy of that spatial portal behind him. He walks with great difficulty toward the portal. He puts both hands to open it, and surprisingly it was unlocked. He needed to open it more. He heard voices from the other side. Chan-ho, with a team dressed entirely in black, looks at him in surprise. Perplexed, they wanted to know how he got out of that situation. Our hero was also trying to understand what was happening. He realized that his rival was near the spatial portal. One of the guys in black asks what happened to the people upstairs. They asked if he managed to handle everyone by himself. The protagonist understood the whole situation. The guys in black thought they had used his abilities and not the artifact. Chan-ho watched the whole situation from afar. The gang leader apologizes to the VIP client. He asks for his help and for him to get the F-rank hunter, while the boss passed his job to the S-rank to be quicker. Chan agrees, especially since they are in the same boat. He approaches while his boss says he will give him a discount. Face to face, he mocks him in front of him. He continues to make fun and asks how about escaping now. He tells the protagonist that it's time to run now. Our hero looks at him, and asks if he has ever seen him run. Shocked by his words, he stood still, recalling all the times Kiryu dealt with the situation. Chanho asks if this time he isn't going to run. Then they should start settling the score right there. Our hero said it wasn't necessary and that he would surrender. His rival provokes him, saying he beat everyone and now he's surrendering. He should believe that this time he was actually surrendering. A celestial blue energy passed through the protagonist. At that moment, both look at the portal. A man comes out of it and asks if his boss is there. That's when our protagonist understood everything. It wasn't a portal but rather a magical passage used for movement. His boss says he was very punctual, arriving at the exact moment. Chang-ho asks if the one who just arrived is the transporter, a guy who can move even people and objects with his abilities. His boss introduces them, and there's a shift in the atmosphere. The transporter moves to greet him, and at that moment, Chang-ho prepares. Before he can finish, Chang-ho hits him right in the face, sending him back to where he came from while the protagonist watches everything. The gang leader screams in indignation at the scene. The transporter has his head stuck in the stone, leaking some tomato juice. The rival clenches his fists and begins his explanation. While everyone is shocked, he explains that he spent a lot to find and deal with him, and when he was involved in illegal trade, he couldn't care less. Our hero is left with many question marks in his head, just like Nazar Tedesco. But wanting to trade someone in his jurisdiction wouldn't let that slide. One of the allies shouts for the boss to get inside the portal. He is hit by a very strong punch from Chang-ho. Meanwhile, our protagonist realizes that he couldn't defeat him. Originally, the ranks go from A to F, and those with the most power are ranked extra. An explosion is caused by the impact of Chang-ho's punches. The boss trembled and sweated coldly, facing the S rank, begging to be spared. The rival looked at him and asked what kind of stupid suggestion that was. He looked at him while calling him useless. He was trembling at the base, and almost purple due to his fate. At that moment, I heard the scream that would be his. As our protagonist concluded, he definitely did not want to mess with Chang-ho. After finishing his work there, they heard police sirens. There were police cars all over the place. His rival asked, startled, if he called the police, and he said yes. Static and also with tomato juice from others on his face, he was paralyzed. He asked not to involve him because he was just trying to stop this illegal activity. Our blonde retorted that this would be a police problem. The rival explained that if that were the case, it would take a long time to resolve it. But things were happening too quickly. He was curious to know more but said goodbye. After thinking, he began to ask where he was going. But if he left in that situation, it seemed that our hero would be the one to blame. The police finally entered the perimeter and surrounded him. He was handcuffed, and the officers asked what happened to the victims. Lying on the ground, he realized he had no luck at all. As they were taking him away, he heard a familiar voice. Cien appeared, worried, seeing Kiryu handcuffed. The officer asked if they knew each other. It turned out that the officer arrested him by mistake. He was the one who reported a kidnapping. The hero asked how she knew that, and she showed Yun's message. Fortunately, she received his message well. Meanwhile, one of the officers was checking something. He caught the leader's attention, and the two looked at him. He discovered that everyone there was involved in human trafficking. There was a group trafficking people, and that was the meeting point. Cien looked at him in shock while the officer speculated that it was the boss's room. The officer approached and asked if Kiryu did that. He said it was Chang-ho, that crazy guy, and the officers didn't believe him. They insisted he be clearer, and then he said he did what he could to protect himself. While Cien thought about the situation, the officer was asking about the artifact. He analyzed the situation and realized that Kiryu had no injuries. He wondered if he really was a kidnapper and if he planned all of this. And the next day at the protagonist's house, he looked down at the artifact and thought it wasn't his intention to do that. But he managed to get the magical artifact for free. It was a benefit. If the police couldn't identify where it came from or who it belonged to, it was a very rare artifact. And so what if someone made a fool of him? Now he could laugh and use his artifact. He held the artifact in his hands and concluded that it could only be used on humans. At that moment, his kettle made a noise indicating it was ready. He turned off the stove and watched the kettle. He poured his tea into a cup, and finally, he had done it. Doing that on a planet with scarce tools was truly out of this world. He managed to make his homemade magic amplifier. When consumed, it increases parts of magic activation. He drank that liquid very satisfied. He placed the cup in the kitchen and noticed that his breathing was fine. The potion lasts for 5 minutes, which allows him to cast a spell. Swinging his arms, he wondered if it was time to perform his first magic. He prepared himself and executed a healing spell to help his knee. A blue magic overflowed from his hands, transporting to his knee. His first spell was a success. He had healed his knee. Then the great wizard realized that Kiryu's mana was worthless. Looking at his hand, he realized that just thinking about his magic running out with a simple spell was disappointing. But he cut off the voices in his head and said he wouldn't think like that. Our hero, wanting to maintain his positivity, set out to plan what to do today. However, there was a noise at the door. Our protagonist went towards the door, wondering if it was someone he knew. Upon opening the door, he was surprised. An elderly man said he was about to call him. He quickly remembered that he was the owner of the house. Our protagonist greeted him, and he apologized for arriving unannounced. The old man asked if he was going through difficulties, and he was surprised by the words. He told him that he hadn't paid this month's rent yet, and he was shocked. He added that it had been 3 months since he last received it, and our alien was perplexed. He is shocked by how many bills he has to pay and nearly faints. The landlord says he will wait until the end of this month for him to pay everything. His debt is 1,350,000 wons, and he is shocked by this. The landlord is leaving and asks that if he can't pay, he has to move out. He briefly thought about whether he would be evicted if he didn't pay the fine. There are only 14 days until the end of the month, and he wonders where he will find that money. He asks himself if he has any savings. Suddenly, a memory hits him. At that moment, he rushes to his cell phone and says he didn't want to use that method. The protagonist searches for something on his phone. He makes a call to Kang Chang-ho. In a giant tower in the city center, Chang-ho answers the call. During the conversation, he wants to know why he didn't accept the deal earlier. Then he asks how much he needs. Our hero thinks for a moment. Trembling, he says he needs 3 million wons, but Chang can't hear him. The protagonist thinks he might need more. Perhaps he could ask for more from him. At that moment, Chang threatens to hang up, and Kiryu responds that he needs 3 million. He asks if that is possible, and Chang repeats his phrase and then looks at his phone. He makes the transfer immediately at that moment. Kiryu looks at his phone, amazed that he managed to get that amount in such a short time. But he thinks that after paying all the bills, he won't have enough for meals. He wonders if there is another way to make more money. At that moment, the protagonist receives a call from Yun. Looking at his phone, he remembers that he didn't have time to thank him. He was about to answer the phone when something came to his mind. An A-rank hunter earns a lot in a dungeon, like many millions. In a cafe, they meet and have the chance to thank each other. He wanted to buy a meal since he contacted Cien and saved his life. Yun said he would appreciate it, but that a coffee would be enough. Our little amoeba preferred to buy a meal. Coffee made him nauseous. A very friendly attendant took their orders. Our hero surprised him by saying he didn't want anything coffee-flavored. They were confused, asking how he could go to a cafe and not want anything with coffee. While eating and drinking, Yun said he was surprised to have been waited on. Yun apologized and wished he could have helped. Kiryu understood since he had to deal with the situation. He vented that the situation was quite bad and that he had to rely on another hunter. The protagonist thinks he could start another topic to lighten the mood. He asks his friend if he has been dealing with dungeon awakenings recently. He hadn't entered dungeons since the last incident. Yun felt embarrassed. Kiryu looked into his eyes and said it was to be expected. Yun, sweating and avoiding eye contact, still feared entering the portals. Our protagonist asks if he is still afraid of portals. Yun says yes, and a drop of sweat rolls down. He vents that going back is a bit difficult for him. The protagonist remembers the incident of facing a high-level monster, along with the betrayal of his allies at that moment. The fear of almost being dragged down hits him. It's a lot for a student who just turned 20. It gave him quite a trauma. Our hero says he can't be his only support network forever. He advises him to form a new team, or even go solo. Yun, looking down, agrees with his friend. Then the protagonist reveals that he wants to train him. The hunter is completely dazzled by the proposal. He reveals that he could help with his control and mana skills. He puts the cup on the table and feels like he caught a big fish. Our hero proposes that they go to a suitable portal now. On the way, Yun is very nervous as if it were his first time. They go to a D-rank portal near the cafe. It is a perfect place for training. The protagonist looks around and feels good about the place. There, he asks his friend to show his defensive attribute. Yun takes a deep breath and feels nervous about showing it. After preparing, he activated his shield. He demonstrated that a barrier is formed in front of the user. Excited, he asked his friend what he thought. Before giving his opinion, he asks his friend, "Why does the shield only protect the front?" Since awakening, Yun understands it has always been this way. The protagonist thought it was like seeing a chimpanzee with a knife. Then he informed him that he needs to block all directions, not just the front. It should encompass him like a glass igloo. After trying, he says he can't increase the shield. His mentor asks him to try again. Advises to distribute the mana as if it were a crystal ball that he would stay in the center. The nervous student thinks he is not doing the right thing. The protagonist tells him to stop being a crybaby and focus. Advises not to lose the image in his head as well. Committed, he asserts he will try again. After some guidance and attempts, it was challenging for both sides. After a very intense training, he finally managed to create a crystal sphere that protected him. Excited, he asked if it really worked. At that moment, his barrier began to shatter. Frustrated with his result, Kiryu explains that it would be better with more practice. The protagonist thought it would get better over time. His student thanks him. He never imagined he could do this. The hunter had a flashback from when he was a child. He had never felt such admiration for anyone in his life. He did not respect any of his mentors at school. He only thought there were people who could achieve something cool in the world. But today the hunter knows what it feels like to have that for a mentor. The student looks at the protagonist, surprised. Many thoughts came to mind as he discovered how to improve his attribute. He had never heard of a skill that detects something to improve in another. He doesn't have analytical skills but saw with his own eyes that he is good in combat. Maybe he used some item to unlock this ability. Finally, he questioned his level to give such advice. At that moment, the protagonist interrupts his thoughts. He approaches and asks if he doesn't want to take a break. Yun lowers his head, embarrassed about his posture, thinking that he was taught by such a capable person but couldn't perform well. He apologizes to Kiryu and promises he will do better next time. Kiryu says he doesn't need to rush while Yun tries to speak. Finally, he concludes that there is plenty of time to train him since he is F rank. Amazed by his image, he is left speechless for a moment. He felt that he was different from the beginning and wanted to reward him somehow. Determined, he asks if he wants something in return. Upon hearing this, the protagonist starts to sweat cold and says there is really nothing. This response is within Yun's expectations. He would not be like the people of modern society who are driven by a little money. Upon awakening with the A-class ability, he thought he could handle anything. But only now does he realize how naive he was. Let's just follow what the big brother said today. Then he cheerfully told the protagonist to come back. At this point, he has already decided that he needs to train a lot. He decides that one day he will help his big brother. The protagonist is filled with restlessness because he asked if he wanted something. But judging by his reaction, he seems uninterested in such things. Perhaps for an A-class hunter, it simply isn't worth mentioning. If that's the case, we can enter higher-level spatial gates next. Moreover, today's harvest is already enough for the next rent. With an anxious heart, he prepares to return and treat himself to something nice. This good mood lasts until the moment the two exit the spatial portal. The protagonist does not understand why Cien would appear here. Cien first looks at the clock and then speaks. Hello, Hunter Yong-Siem. Originally, she came here to warn Yun about something. She looks seriously at the protagonist. Someone of F level shouldn't be there. The protagonist starts to sweat cold. He was caught at the entrance. He explains that he entered the portal to help Yun. But Wuno doesn't believe a word of it. Of course, Yun also doesn't escape a sermon. Helping a hunter enter a spatial gate illegally is also against the law. Although this is exactly what happened, the protagonist still tries to argue. He emphasizes that the association did not impose any restrictions on carriers. But the agent shows no mercy. These rules were made for real carriers. She looks sternly at the protagonist. Doesn't he understand that this is suspicious? This disregard for the level classification inevitably raises questions, and the protagonist reluctantly agrees. Cien was very tolerant with the protagonist, making him forget about this. This girl in front of him is B-level, capable of defeating something with her hands. In the end, Cien just warns them and asks Yun to go with her. She has notifications about changes in the area of the instance she is responsible for suppressing. Yun bids farewell to the protagonist with tears in his eyes, and he watches the two leave. The protagonist realizes that his money-making scheme will no longer work. But it's not a big problem. He already has a plan B prepared. The moment the protagonist steps away, Cien secretly looks back. The next morning, the first thing the protagonist does is lie in bed. Collecting information through his phone has become a habit. This time he receives useful news. An item has finally been analyzed. This bracelet is called the Twin Guardian Angel. It was discovered for the first time in this X-grade instance. The protagonist has kept it with the intention of compensating John Hazong for it. But after all this time, he is sure that he no longer wants it. The protagonist puts it on for the first time. It fits perfectly on his wrist. The reason he is wearing it is that today's experiment is somewhat dangerous. The protagonist arrives alone at a spatial gate. He never thought he would be so nervous without a bodyguard. Even though this is the lowest F-grade gate, spatial gates are generally divided into two types, red and blue. Small monsters appear when a certain number are eliminated. It then closes. Even the protagonist can come and go freely. This is a good place to practice. He is here to cultivate monsters, although he has been warned by the agent. Defeating these F-level creatures can still earn him some expenses. The protagonist enters the spatial gate and finds himself under a blue sky, with endless fields stretching out before him not far from where he is. A group of monsters was peacefully grazing on grass. They are natives here called defective goats. They are named so because the sounds they make resemble broken violins. Despite their gentle appearance, they are among the most dangerous monsters at level F. The protagonist opens a bottle of magical power amplifier and drinks it in one gulp. He immediately feels the familiar power spreading throughout his body. The powerful magical energy surrounding him inevitably attracts the monster's attention. But it is too late for them because the protagonist's launch speed is greater than anyone else's. He extends his index finger, forming a small flame at the tip. The flame shoots out like a bullet, growing and turning into a searing fireball. The protagonist calmly watches the scene turn to ashes. As his words fall, the fireball approaches its target. As soon as the fireball makes contact with the target, it abruptly disappears into the air. This result completely surprises the protagonist, leaving him unsure how to react. A wisp of black smoke slowly rises from the forehead of the goat that was attacked for no reason. This infuriates it, and its veins bulge as white smoke escapes from its nostrils. With a clearly life-or-death posture, it directly attacks the protagonist. Seeing this, the protagonist nearly dies of fear. He runs while complaining that he knew this would happen. The level F magical power is truly useless. He runs while looking back in terror. Fortunately, he manages to escape through the spatial portal just before being caught. After successfully escaping, the protagonist looks back, breathless. Thank goodness the monster did not follow him. The protagonist is very tired. This body is in worse condition than he imagined. Just this short run almost killed him from exhaustion. The moment the protagonist recovers, a voice reaches his ears. He turns to find out. A strange man was looking at him with enthusiasm. Dude, is that really you? It's been a while since I last saw you. The protagonist is confused. At first, it seems like this is the first time he meets this guy. The man grabs his hand with familiarity and explains that they once took the hunter qualification exam together, although the protagonist does not remember anything. As they talk, more and more fragments appear in his mind. This indicates that the man was indeed someone the original body owner knew. He decides not to speak but to observe the situation first. The other party continues to talk a lot, with no intention of stopping. This makes the protagonist feel irritated. Does this guy not realize he is talking to an alien in human skin? Finally, the man says that this kind of meeting is fate and invites the protagonist to join his team. It turns out they are missing one person today. He points in a direction indicating his teammates. Where he is pointing, there are 3 fully armed hunters. Among them, the one with the strongest magical power, carrying an axe, is the team leader, a level D hunter. The young man asks the protagonist what he thinks. If he agrees, they can enter the instance immediately. For a weak hunter, there is no more effective strategy than group hunting. However, the protagonist chooses to decline because he has already used today's magical power amplifier. Surprisingly, even after honestly saying that his magical power is depleted, the other person shows no hesitation. No problem. Anyway, we are not looking for someone to hunt. It turns out they need a loader to help collect items and are offering a high daily salary. Upon learning that he only needs to carry things to earn money, the protagonist becomes immediately excited. He thinks this proposal is good. He can join a regular hunter team and observe how they hunt. But he does not notice the sinister and studious expression on the man's face. The protagonist ends up accepting the proposal and follows them back to the instance. Then he spends 3 interesting hours watching the battle from the outside. The small team coordinates well, with each person playing a role. Simple, comfortable, and safe, like skilled primitive humans hunting a mammoth. After the hunt, the team leader takes the protagonist's package. He generously praises him for doing a good job. Then he counts a stack of bills in front of the protagonist. He then hands them to the protagonist, leaving him embarrassed. It seems too much for a loader of his level. The leader asks if he would be free tomorrow. Finding another loader would be a problem, inviting the protagonist to continue joining them. But as he says this, his gaze firmly fixes on the twin guardian angel bracelet. Newly arrived in the land, the protagonist has not yet learned the principle of not showing off. He seems unaware that his bracelet has caught everyone's attention. In the world of hunters, there are those who abandon hunting dangerous monsters. Instead, they target novice hunters who are not familiar with instances. The way they hunt their own kind resembles frogs. Therefore, calling them frogs could not be more appropriate. Not only do they steal, but they also take pleasure in making them go American. The protagonist has undoubtedly become a target for this group. Time passes quickly to the next day, and the protagonist arrives at the agreed location. His feelings are complicated. Whenever he sees the man who claims to be his friend, he always remembers something. The protagonist asks if today's payment will be the same as yesterday's. The leader agrees and says he will pay with brand new bills. With expectations, the protagonist enters a new F-class instance with them, and it is at this moment that he witnesses the ugliness of human nature. After dealing with the monsters and exhausting the protagonist's usefulness, these people stop pretending. The leader smashes a bottle against the back of the protagonist's head. This sudden blow causes the protagonist to kneel instantly. At this point, the The protagonist still does not understand what is happening. Do all these damned earthlings enjoy beating their own kind? Seeing that the protagonist did not faint from the blow, the hunters are not in a hurry. They take a strong sedative and cover his mouth with it. A few more seconds should make it work, but they miscalculated. The Archmage of Alpha Yuri is immune to sedative mental attacks. After some time, he is not sedated, which shocks the team. Faced with this situation, the protagonist decides that running away is the best option. While the group is trying to process what happened, he gets up and runs. Although he successfully takes the initiative, he is just an ordinary person. He is quickly caught by a vine and suspended in the air. The one who made this move was the young man with black hair who claimed to be his great friend. When the protagonist lands again, a huge axe appears before him. Seeing this, he raises both hands and asks why they are doing this. Then he realizes that everyone is looking at his left hand. The protagonist looks helplessly at the bracelet on his wrist. Then he gestures with his left hand, and they lean to the left. Next, he gestures to the right, and everyone follows to the right. So it's all because of this bracelet. This bracelet can block any attack twice, even from S-level monsters. Instead, the equipment meant to protect him has brought disasters. Of course, he cannot hand it over because they would certainly destroy all the evidence. Thus, faced with their threats, the protagonist chooses to refuse. He asks them not to move if they do not use their 2 defense charges. After being used, it will lose its magical effect and become an ordinary accessory. However, these words not only do not work but also infuriate the hunter. He lowers his axe and kicks the protagonist away. The leader is furious with his attitude and starts punching him, and the sound echoes through the cave. With each blow he throws, he begs the protagonist to use it. If this continues, the protagonist will surely be beaten to death. With no choice, he shouts loudly that he will hand over the bracelet. The D-level hunter smiles. Violence is indeed the most effective solution to problems. The protagonist raises his trembling hand and delivers what was his reality. His hand touches the bracelet because just the act of handing it over will end everything. Just when he is about to give up fighting, they suddenly hear footsteps. Who could be entering at this hour? The hunting team looks back and starts to sweat cold. The protagonist is equally shocked by the scene. Why would that guy be there? The person who suddenly appears is none other than the hunter Yun. He is stunned by the scene before him. It turns out that before entering the instance, the protagonist contacted Yun, asking for help with his skills and for him to wait at the entrance of the instance. Upon receiving the message, Yun became extremely excited. He thought he had lost his value, but was surprised by the invitation. Yun is the passage for the older brother to high-level instances. Since they were caught last time, he thought the protagonist wouldn't seek him out. But the protagonist was willing to dedicate his time to help with his skills. As a thank you, he bought a coffee specifically for Big Bro. So Yun waited at the instant entrance. But after noon, the protagonist still hadn't come out. This made Yun realize that something was wrong. A simple F-level instance shouldn't take this long. Could there have been an abnormal mutation and something went wrong? Suddenly increasing the level of the instance. Although these situations are rarely safe, he decided to enter and check. He banished the negative emotions from his heart and carefully crossed the door. However, what happened next shattered his imagination. He saw his older brother taking a beating, and Yun sighed at the scene. The person who always seemed to be in control was now seriously injured. In Yun's cold voice, a violent and magical power swirls around his body. Then he walks step by step toward the seemingly stronger man. He firmly grabs the man's skull. In the next moment, he violently throws him away. His only concern is to control his strength, to avoid killing them with a single blow. Soon Yun resolves all the fights, leaving none to tell the tale. But his feelings are now mixed, no matter how you look at it. These guys were too weak, they needed to eat a lot of rice and beans. At the moment he is perplexed, the protagonist's voice reaches his ears. The protagonist thanks him, saying that if it weren't for him, he would be finished. He turns around, surprised to see the protagonist walking toward him, battered. Despite his worn face, the protagonist's voice remains calm as always. He was grateful that Yun came to look for him. Yes, however, the protagonist's next words leave him stunned. Yun asks if he wasn't afraid to enter the portal alone. There he realizes that he hasn't entered a portal alone in a long time. Normally, just hearing the word portal terrifies him. But this time, his mind was filled with worries about his older brother. He rushed in without thinking. Could all of this be part of Big Brother's plan? The protagonist says they should leave the instance and report these guys. Only now does Yun notice something strange, even when attacked by hunters. The older brother never showed any surprise, as if everything was expected. Everything seems to have been planned in advance, but he doesn't express his doubts. Why would the older brother have any reason to deliberately prepare these things? At that moment, the protagonist speaks softly. Yun, if my position were higher, I would definitely join you. You are not only strong but always think about how to save people. I hope you understand that you are an incredible and awakened person. These simple words bring Yun to tears, thinking deeply. Why hasn't he formed a new team and remained stagnant all this time? As a defensive-type hunter, he didn't protect his teammates. He couldn't communicate with new hunters. And at that moment, something happened that required the rescue of a friend. He created a situation similar to what happened before to overcome his traumas. Yun conquered himself through self-rationalization. All of this was the older brother's plan. The injuries on the older brother's body were quite severe. Who would have imagined that someone could strive so hard for others? Understanding everything, Yun speaks with difficulty. Why does he always take such good care of Yun? Upon hearing this, the protagonist seems perplexed. The protagonist advises him to take care of himself, and Yun nods affirmatively. Kiryu, stop trying so hard because you are a good person. Yun looks at the protagonist with admiration, and so the two exit together from the spatial portal. Finally outside, the protagonist asks Yun to turn himself into the police. So while Yun is making the call, he says, "Let's start training tomorrow. You need to go home first." Upon hearing this, Yun is shocked. What do you mean go home? He needed to go to the hospital. But the protagonist waves his hand, saying it's not necessary. Without waiting for Yun's response, he quickly steps away. And Yun watches this scene wanting to speak but hesitating. What F rank can heal itself? Healing potions are expensive. Did he decide to stop pretending to be F rank in front of me? Meanwhile, the protagonist can only lament his misery. His ribs hurt a lot. For the protagonist, this has been a terrible week. First kidnapped by traffickers, then facing thieves who tried to steal his items, almost losing his precious new life. Who knows how many bones were broken, taking several days for the final recovery. Just when he thought he could rest for a few days, today he is called in for questioning by the Hunter Association. The protagonist feels more and more irritated with each passing day, but complaints aside, nothing will change. Looking at the shiny bracelet on the table, feeling guilty about the recent incident. Through an investigation, the protagonist discovered it is worth billions. However, for some reason, he lacks the determination to sell it immediately. After all, being able to nullify any attack twice, who knows when this could become crucial for survival, especially for someone magically inept like him, who can barely withstand slightly stronger attacks. So it's better to carry it discreetly from now on. The weather outside is nice, but the protagonist is in a bad mood, because as soon as he steps out, he encounters a sports car honking frantically. The protagonist wonders what crazy person is causing such a disturbance in broad daylight. When the car window rolls down, it's really the crazy Kong Chang-ho. He quickly averts his gaze, pretending not to see. Unfortunately, Kong Chang-ho doesn't give him that opportunity. He asks the protagonist where he is going at this hour, unable to avoid him. The protagonist reluctantly replies, "I'm going to the Hunter Association." "Oh my god, it's almost time. I'm busy." So that's it. With that, the protagonist prepares to leave immediately. But a warning comes from behind. "Get in the car." As soon as Kong Chang-ho finishes speaking, the protagonist quickly sits in the passenger seat. He fastens his seatbelt, desperately trying to hide his nervousness. "I'm a civilized alien, so I decided to follow Kong Chang-ho's suggestion. Not because I'm scared in any way, by the way. Why did this guy show up at my door?" He carefully considers if he did something wrong. He kept the secret about John Aesong and didn't mention Kong Chang-ho's name during the kidnapping case. There's no reason for him to be angry. The moment the protagonist is lost in his thoughts, Kong Chang-ho's voice suddenly reaches him. "I heard you were attacked by those frogs." He's talking about the thieves. Yes, but it's curious to know how the other party knows that the protagonist answers the question. "I heard you got hurt, so I came specifically to check if your injuries are serious. Isn't that right?" Upon hearing this, the protagonist is startled. "Wait, what did you say you came to do?" Kong Chang-ho continues turning the steering wheel and says, "I came to confirm if you were seriously injured. That was a dangerous accident. Example of grade 10. The kidnapping. Come to think of it, you've hardly had any peaceful days. I'm starting to wonder if you're enjoying this exciting life." Then Kong Chang-ho mentions that he brought a gift and tells the protagonist to open the storage box to see. Receiving gifts is always exciting. Therefore, the protagonist has no reason to refuse. Opening the box, he finds a crystal vial containing a liquid. Kong Chang-ho explains, "This is a recovery potion. Although you don't seem to need it since I brought it. It's yours." The protagonist examines the vial carefully. "So this is the healing potion from the land. I see." Knowing he was hurt, he specifically chose this item. Similar things happen in his homeland when their tentacles are injured. Friends bring recovery potions. Just like children with fevers receive antibiotics. Receiving such friendly treatment in the land is truly unexpected. "Thank you very much. I will make good use of this." Seeing the protagonist accept the gift, Kong Chang-ho smiles. "It's just a small thing. No need to be so surprised." The protagonist simply didn't expect someone like him to do good deeds. This is really surprising, but he doesn't want to take this medicine. Who knows what strange ingredients it might contain? It's better to take it back and study it first. At that moment, with a shout, the car stops. Kang Chang-ho looks at the protagonist and says, "We've arrived. Get out of the car." The protagonist is startled by this sudden order. He looks around and realizes they are in a familiar building, the entrance of the Hunters Association. It seems this earthling has brought him to his destination, although he doesn't quite understand the situation. If he says to leave, then leave. The protagonist expresses his gratitude to Kang Chang-ho, and then asks a question that is intriguing him. "Why do you care so much about me?" Meanwhile, he thinks silently. He even threatened to kill me if I didn't give false testimony. Upon hearing this question, Kang Chang-ho smiled. "Actually, I am interested in developing hunters, and you are one of the most promising. Therefore, unless absolutely necessary, I do not want to harm you. Do you understand what I mean?" The protagonist thinks he probably wants him to continue keeping John Aesong's secret, so he nods to indicate understanding. "Very good. Now hurry up. Say you were late because you spent too long in the shower." Kang Chang-ho leaves this little tease before walking away. Talent development for talent development, not just to crush the organizations that kidnap the awakened, but immediately rushing with medicine upon hearing that someone is injured. A true patriot. Indeed, although he wants to say this, the reality is certainly not that simple, because an awakened who can kill their own kind without hesitation would hardly possess such a sense of justice. The protagonist contemplates the healing potion and thinks, why would Kang Chang-ho be interested in a level F person like him? However, this confusing question is suddenly resolved one day. On that day, as usual, he was absorbed in browsing the internet. Then he discovered a skill, ambition, a positive word. But after reading the skill description, the protagonist couldn't feel happy at all. It's a skill that kills stronger people to steal their abilities. Seriously? Who would give such a terrible name to a skill? It is at this moment. The first person the protagonist thought of was Kang Chang-ho. Carefully recalling what Kang Chang-ho did. First, Kang Chang-ho offered to support his hunter activities. Secondly, Kang Chang-ho was sensitive to the fact that promising awakened individuals go abroad. Thirdly, Kang Chang-ho once warned him not to die. Putting all this together, it can't be. Kang Chang-ho should just be a pure patriot. But no matter what he thinks about it, being targeted by a level S hunter is not a good sign. Therefore, he now has only one option. He must quickly resolve this level F trash body, whether by transferring to another body or healing his lungs. Thinking about this, the protagonist becomes restless and immediately begins to act. But research is like this. Expecting ideal results from a single experiment is almost impossible. The protagonist has already exhausted himself on the floor. Everything seems meaningless. He transmigrated to retire. So, why is he still working after the transmigration? Why? At the moment the protagonist is losing his spirit, he hears the vibration of a phone. He picks it up and sees an unknown number, starting with 010. Without thinking much, he answers the call. For a long time, there is no sound on the other end. He is about to hang up when a familiar voice comes through the receiver. "It's me. Can we meet?" An hour later, in a park near the protagonist's home, he sits down with his old acquaintance, Seavoyan. Seavoyan speaks first. "I'm sorry for bothering you suddenly, but I thought it would be better to talk in person." The protagonist says it's fine. Although the association's contacts usually bring nothing good, the protagonist owes Seavoyan a favor, so he should at least listen to what she has to say. Seavoyan awkwardly sits on the steps and says, "I need your analytical skills. Can you help for a while?" "About 2 weeks. The protagonist asks if she needs something identified. Seavoyan explains, "It's not that. She is working with the police on an investigation of a case where the criminals left traces in an instance, but they can't decipher them. They have already invited national-level analysts to investigate but with no results. In fact, all the powerful analysts are in foreign companies or large corporations, and the others are of varying quality. Among the analysts, Seavoyan only knows that the protagonist is not affiliated with any guild and has already gone through the labyrinth of the magic tower." Then she nervously apologizes, saying they can't offer much compensation for an analyst. It's almost like working for free. Even the fact that Seavoyan says this makes the protagonist wonder how little it is. Is it not even enough to cover the cost of a meal? "I know this request is unreasonable, but can you help me? I also helped you once." However, before finishing, Seavoyan retracts her words. "Don't forget what I just said." The protagonist is confused by this. After all, he does owe her a favor. Seavoyan explains that saving people is her duty. She shouldn't use favors as leverage. That's why she is willing to pay out of her own pocket to ask the protagonist for help with the investigation. What's wrong with being a little sensitive in moments like this? It seems that Seavoyan is a person with considerable conscience, but the protagonist has a doubt. Because of her tracking skills, Seavoyan often cooperates with the police. But still, why is she so enthusiastic about the search? So he asks, "If you catch the criminals, you'll receive a bonus." However, Her answer surprises him. No, I won't receive any benefit. But shouldn't we always do our best? After all, each case affects someone's life. Seavoyan speaks calmly. These words make the protagonist develop a bit of goodwill towards her, perhaps because he has been exploited by unscrupulous bosses. Seeing such a pure and kind creature immediately makes him view her with new respect. But that's a separate matter. At that moment, the protagonist says faithfully, Seavoyan, you just said you would hire me at your own expense, right? Seavoyan is startled. Ah yes. Then pay the commission fee now. Although he finds Seavoyan likable, the protagonist cannot accept parasitism. Hearing this, Cien Wuyun nervously swallows and asks how much. The two arrive at a restaurant. What is he doing? This question has been on Cien's mind since she arrived at the restaurant. With his identification skills, he would be welcome anywhere. The hourly wage of a high-level analyst is a figure that ordinary people wouldn't dare to imagine. Originally, Cien was prepared to be rejected when she sought his help. Who could have imagined he would accept and ask her to order a plate of food? Just thinking about how he seriously said he would pay for her lunch for 2 weeks. In the end, she distractedly took him to a small, ordinary restaurant. Knife-cut noodles are really good, Cien Wu asks nervously. The protagonist cheerfully replies that it was very tasty. Cien can hardly believe that there are awake people like this. When people acquire powerful skills, they usually indulge in luxury, but he continues to live in such a poor room. However, Cien does not fully trust him. Maybe he seems frugal on purpose to appear more like a level F hunter. For example, during the kidnapping incident, why didn't he run outside? And why did he sneak into high-level instances? Indeed, there are many suspicious points. Thinking about this, Cien looks at the person across the table with attentive eyes. Why is everything going so well? Since her identification ability became public, many have extended olive branches to her, but she ignored everything. But she chose to help him because the situation is urgent, and she needs to seek his help. She won't let her guard down. Soon the protagonist finishes eating, even though it is a deserved payment. The fact that everything is going into his own stomach still makes him feel a bit guilty. Then he watches the woman in front of him closely. When Cien realizes that the protagonist is staring at her, she holds her breath. Finding his gaze always brings an inexplicable pressure. The protagonist asks what kind of business they would be discussing. Upon hearing this, Cien falls silent for a moment and informs him that there are terrorists in the area. This simple statement frightens the protagonist, who shouts. Cien quickly reminds him to speak more quietly. Cien informs him that they have special and different methods. They don't use bombs or similar means for terrorist attacks, but rather monsters. Cien explains that someone has been deliberately provoking outbreaks in the dungeons. A dungeon outbreak refers to the escape of monsters from the dungeons. The spatial gates are timed as if they were bombs. If the dungeon is not managed, the entrance of the spatial gate will be destroyed and explode, and all the monsters inside will rush towards the city. This phenomenon is known as a dungeon outbreak, and people use it to explore. The protagonist furrows his brow, surprised that someone would dare to do something so dangerous. Cien shakes her head and doesn't know because they have just started investigating. But there is a doubt if the dungeon disappears after a while, how to investigate afterward. This question is quickly answered by Cien. That's why she says the criminal left traces. Because this time the dungeon did not disappear. Recently, there was a large-scale outbreak of fire element monsters. But after the monsters escaped, the dungeon did not disappear. After a while, they will go to a red portal that they would investigate. At the appointed time, Cien arrives punctually with another person. Cien tells the protagonist that this person will enter with him as a supervisor. Curious, the protagonist asks Cien about herself. She explains that she will be waiting outside as she is just support with little combat skill. Cien informs him that this is a B-class dungeon, but there are no more monsters inside. Looking at the spatial gate, the protagonist can't help but feel a subtle sense of incongruity. Several hours later, after sweating a lot in a lava zone, he has results. After they finish their investigation, the two exit the suffocating dungeon. Before Cien can ask about his findings, Kiryu asks for water. After emptying several bottles, he finally feels alive again. With cold sweat on her face, Cien asks what he discovered. The protagonist's first words are, "I have bad news for you. We probably won't be able to identify the perpetrator." Upon hearing this, Cien is startled and asks why. Because there are no clues confirming the identity, and the dungeon shows no signs of human manipulation. However, he found something strange pointing to the spatial gate behind him. This is a channel forcibly opened by an awakened one. Upon hearing this, Cien's eyes widen in surprise. If it's a forcibly open channel, then this is a false exit. In summary, a terrorist can open new entrances and exits in dungeons. Cien wonders why someone would do such a thing because of outbreaks in the dungeon, but the protagonist indicates that this is probably not the case. In his analysis, the protagonist thought of several methods to open the dungeons, so he can say that the number of channels has nothing to do with the dungeon. At that moment, the protagonist remembers something. Cien said that this strange dungeon is not the first, that this situation has occurred 3 times this year, with dungeons suddenly exploding ahead of schedule. The previous crimes left no evidence, but this time they deliberately left an empty dungeon to attract attention. What could be the objective of these guys? Cien speculates that perhaps the criminal this time is not the same as in the previous cases. Although this assumption is reasonable, it remains mere speculation. Don't go into this dungeon again in the future, Cien warns the protagonist, pointing to the spatial gate surrounded by police tape. Cien doesn't understand why. The protagonist explains that this false channel is highly stable and will disappear in a day. Upon hearing this, Cien turns pale. Her only clue is about to vanish. The protagonist looks at the spatial portal and realizes he needs to find new clues. Soon after, the dungeon that the protagonist warned about indeed disappears from the world. They lose their only lead to track the criminal. From that day on, the terror incidents also stop, and the communication between the protagonist and Cien Wu gradually decreases. Bored, the protagonist stays home browsing on his phone. Recently, everyone has been discussing a topic. A series of disappearances in the Umbian district with 7 victims. All ordinary people without magical power. Who would be capable of doing this? The protagonist wonders. Suddenly, a phone call rings. It's from Cien Wu. The protagonist answers without hesitation, followed by a normal conversation. Cien always likes to convey information clearly and concisely. With the unfolding disappearance case in the district, she has been appointed as an investigator, and the protagonist, who signed a 2-week contract with her, is now dragged along. In another location, the protagonist successfully meets Cien and raises a question. If we are looking for missing persons, her ability could help. He has reasons to suspect that she is treating him as free labor. He was about to say that he used his skills with the missing persons. The results were very strange, completely out of the ordinary. He couldn't locate the first 2 people at all. When searching for the last person, his ability worked normally, but their location is underground. Upon hearing this, the protagonist is shocked. The missing person could have been buried alive. The serious crime is already apparent, but Cien's confusion doesn't end there. Her ability can only confirm the identity of a target. She can track their location even if they are dead. In the first 2 cases, she couldn't even find coordinates. Therefore, Cien suspects that this is a trap set by the criminal. So you called me here to explore a trap, the protagonist comments accurately. Indeed, normally we wouldn't call an evaluator in these situations. It would be safer to have an active hunter. Upon hearing this, the protagonist almost laughs out loud and mocks the situation. Cien seems to hear the protagonist grumbling and asks. The protagonist naturally changes the subject, saying it's nothing, because complaining to her wouldn't help at all. They continue searching for the missing persons. Soon, Cien stops walking and says that the missing persons would be there. If a missing person buried underground is motionless, there is only one possibility. Everyone falls into a brief silence. Quickly, this area is cordoned off. The police officers who are investigating gather here. Then, the police supervisor organizes a group to search the surroundings and another to start digging. Cien tells the protagonist to patrol the area with her as there may be more clues. The protagonist curiously asks if he doesn't need to supervise the scene. However, his task is already complete. He has used his tracking quota for the day. Cien explains and then gives a bitter smile after saying it 3 times. I am just an empty and useless shell. The protagonist does not respond much to this statement. However, the conversation continues between the two. Please notify immediately if you find anything dangerous nearby. Although the protagonist is already examining, he still nods, saying, there are no magical traps in this area. Cien laughs and says that this was a positive point. However, in the next moment, she seems to notice something. Suddenly, she stops walking and says, Kirio, wait a moment. Upon hearing Cien's voice, the protagonist looks up. Cien Wu points in a direction and asks if he can see. Next to that tree, there was a different figure. It seems that someone is standing there. The protagonist's vision is not good, although it is better than when he lived at the bottom of the sea in his previous life. He cannot see clearly where Cian is pointing, so he simply examines the magical fluctuations in that area. Then a human silhouette surrounded by a weak magical power appears in his view. There is an awakened one there, the protagonist explains. Upon hearing this, Cien is startled, asking how an awakened one could be there. After the confirmation, Cien runs back to ask for help. The protagonist is intrigued about who might be behind that tree. A wanderer or someone related to this case. Judging by the magical power, they are only of class E, but they seem to be biting something. At that moment, Cien returns with others, pointing to where the awakened one would be. In the next moment, a change occurs. When the figure swallows what is in its mouth, its class power increases. Feeling the magical flow from the opposite side, the protagonist suddenly realizes that something is wrong. And wait, it seems that this person's target is different. He abruptly turns to look to the side and shouts to Cien, alerting her. He reaches out to Cien with the intention of pulling her away. But it is too late. The awakened one has already unleashed its ability. Although the protagonist notices his body is slow, he cannot keep up with the pace. The protagonist simply tells Cien not to panic, because they were about to fall, and when the protagonist finishes speaking, they fall. A strong sensation of free fall spreads quickly through their bodies. A blue portal opens like the enormous mouth of a beast. After a long fall, they land in a small lake. The protagonist, who was a sea creature in his previous life, is relaxing, feeling as if his back is almost broken. Cien cannot swim, and another police officer goes towards her to rescue her. Soon, Cien is pulled from the water. The officer calls her name while pressing on her abdomen. The investigator coughs up the water and finally manages to breathe. The officer relaxes, turning to ask the protagonist what had happened. He receives confirmation from the protagonist that 3 people were captured this way. At that moment, the blue light coming from above suddenly disappears. The entrance to the dungeon closes. Now the protagonist finally understands the cases of disappearance in the district. His head feels chaotic. He needs to calm down first and clarify the current situation. He barely has time as 2 heads appear behind rocks not far from them. One of them asks if that team are hunters. The officer is startled by the situation. They were the missing people from the district. The officer checks if they are the high school students who recently disappeared. The children run out crying and throw themselves into the officer's arms. 6 people were brought here, and all the others have perished. Only the 2 were still alive in that dungeon. The surviving high school students say tearfully. The officer is momentarily stunned but then makes a confident expression. He takes out a portable analyzer. The basic information of the dungeon is displayed. B-class dungeon and quite a high level. But the situation is not so bad because there is an awakened one here who can fight monsters. The protagonist tells them to calm down, explaining that there are not many monsters here. After speaking, the protagonist walks towards Cien. He asks her to start hunting and that there might be an exit. However, when he sees her face clearly, the protagonist is left speechless. Miss Cien, she seems not to hear the protagonist's words. After a while, she trembles and says, "Let me out, let me out." Her body is in a state of shock. Communication is completely impossible. She even starts scratching her arms with her nails, and her eyes are filled with terror. Cien has always lived a very ordinary life but was satisfied with it. Getting up in the morning to go to school and helping her parents manage the farm. Her parents didn't want her to do the heavy work and asked her to go play. However, young Cien said she preferred to pick tea leaves. In short, whenever she had time, she diligently helped her parents. It was a quiet day like any other, but on that day, peace was shattered. A red space gate suddenly appeared, and a monstrous bird flew out from within it. Cien and her mother were terrified and trembling. Faced with the monster running towards Cien, her mother did not hesitate to save her. Then the monster bird bit her mother. For his wife, her father approached without hesitation. Cien Wu, her awakened ability is not a searching power. Her true awakening is of the wind type. On this planet completely enveloped by the atmosphere, who is as powerful as you. She had been hiding her true attribute all along. She is fundamentally an atmospheric manipulation mage. The protagonist knew this from their first meeting but never mentioned it. Cien looks at the protagonist in disbelief and asks how she knew. Then she explains that she wasn't lying. The protagonist does not understand what she means and hears Cien say that she does not use it. It turns out that the monster that killed her parents 7 years ago was a creature that controlled the wind. Ironically, she awakened with the same ability as the monster. Every time she tries to use her ability, that memory surfaces in her mind, stopping her. Upon hearing this, the protagonist is stunned. There were no such cases in Alfieri. Psychological problems that prevented the use of magic. This is a completely beginner characteristic. After reflecting for a moment, the protagonist simply warns that there is nothing wrong. In other words, you can use your abilities whenever you want. She is the strongest hunter of her class and can easily handle the monsters here. She asks her to trust her words. However, despite this, she still hesitates about her ability. Deep down, she doesn't believe the protagonist at all. Why would he be standing there in this impasse? A sudden scream is heard, and they look towards the sound only to see a flying monster. The monster with its wings spread is exactly like the one from the accident 7 years ago. In an instant, Cien remembers the fear of being dominated by monsters. She is so scared that she trembles all over, unable to move. The protagonist shouts at Cien, seeing no response from her. Our hero finally decides to give up. Those destined to live will survive. But the problem is the behavior pattern of this monster. It completely ignored those who were standing and headed towards Kiryu. To make matters worse, the protagonist trips over a stone and falls. Then the monster catches up and assumes an attacking stance. Finally trapped in a desperate situation, the protagonist screams. But Cien, overwhelmed by panic, does not hear his voice. However, the next scene makes her awaken her mind and pull back to reality. The tail of the flying monster pierces the man's shoulder like a hook. Even from a distance, the sound of the impact is clearly audible. At that moment, a strong thought arises in her mind. Was he not hiding his level and really just a weak class F? Confusion suddenly arises in her mind. If this continues, this monster will finish off its prey, dragging it into the deep cave and finishing it off, just like her loved ones died. The terrible scene of that day once again overlaps with reality. At that moment, her heart suddenly exploded with a sharp pain. Cien screams in anger, and a gust of wind arises from nowhere. It is Cien releasing magic unconsciously due to the enormous impact of the scene before her. This is the power she wanted to use to protect her parents 7 years ago. The airflow transforms into blades, tearing as if cutting paper. Cien kills the Class B monster with just a flick of her hand. But before she can rejoice, she immediately rushes to hold the protagonist. Picking the protagonist up as if he were a princess, Cien lets out a sigh of relief and places the protagonist on the ground, anxiously asking if he was okay and how she could help him. She searches frantically but realizes she has no recovery potions. However, the protagonist says that she would manage and was alive on her own. Upon hearing this, Cien silently sheds tears. Reality is completely different from her daily nightmares. With this power, she can finally save other people even amidst the chaos. This fact leaves a deep impression in her heart. At this moment, the police officer who fled with the 2 children returns. Seeing the protagonist's deplorable state, he asks if he is okay. Cien immediately asks the officer if he has emergency tools. Unfortunately, the officer says he does not have any. The protagonist observes the scene and then sits down calmly. The officer warns him not to move, but the protagonist says he is fine. He asks everyone to step back because he needs to take off his clothes to recover. He says he has a recovery potion. Cien looks at him with a hole in his body but shows such serenity. Secretly, she suspects that this person might be injured and not quite right in the head. In the cave, the protagonist was recovering behind a rock. The officer was trying to calm the situation. One of the students was crying a lot. We see the protagonist trying to remove the monster's tail from his shoulders. He grabs it with his hands and tries to pull it off with force. He spills a little tomato juice on the ground. Then he throws the tail down. Fortunately, he had a little potion with him, and he takes it from his jacket. He drinks it, sweating cold from his effort, healing from that monster's attack. The wound is completely closed by a flash of blue light. The investigator looks at the rock, wondering if he is okay. At that moment, the protagonist announces that he is fine and that he held on. He appears later and says he is feeling better to the officer. She is surprised how a low-level hunter can have this kind of potion. Our hero advises them to move and get out of there. Since he had now used his ability, it would be easier to leave. He asks her not to worry and that he will support her in whatever she needs. That ability is his own weapon, and he cannot let fear control it. That said, she battles with several monsters, tearing them apart with her magic. One of them lands on top of her. At the last moment, she reacts, slicing it. Our hero congratulates her for doing very well. The group joins her, and she is very tired. Does that mean they could go home? They could already leave, but the protagonist says to wait a bit. Meanwhile, the investigator wonders if she should already speak the truth. She has been covered in paperwork all this time, and now has to face a big monster. A large sculptural stone door is seen by them, and a large red eye with a flash of light appears. Honestly, she was very scared. The protagonist was observing the entire scene. The investigator was paralyzed with fear, unable to deal with the monster. Our hero approaches her, who was sitting and withdrawn. He directly asks her if she feels like she won't be able to do it. She looks at him, not understanding what he just said. The protagonist apologizes for what happened earlier. Perhaps he overloaded her. He ends by saying that it is not her fault but rather those terrorists who threw them there. But given the circumstances, she should try a little harder one more time. If she succeeds, she would survive in any kind of dungeon. Determined, she stands up to continue and says she has rested enough. The group walks towards the door, but the protagonist stops them, saying to wait a moment. He informs the group that the boss is quite large, so the situation would be very dangerous. Only the protagonist and the investigator would enter there. The doors open, and they walk into the dungeon. As they walk in, they hear a different roar. Huge breaths are seen in front of them. A glacial monster with huge horns and large wings is seen. The protagonist informs them that it has no weak points, and that they should attack immediately. The investigator prepares to take it down in just one move. A blade of wind is launched at the beast, which is caught off guard. However, the beast manages to dodge the attack while preparing to counterattack. At that moment, the protagonist tries to speak, to tell her to dodge the beast's attack. Our alpha mage Hori runs from the beast's attack, while she casts a spell that separates the attack. Quickly, the beast tries to stomp on the investigator, but she dodges. She concentrates all her magic and throws it at the beast, hitting it directly in the face. The protagonist notices that she is visibly exhausted and almost out of mana. Then he realizes that her mission is not very easy, especially since it is her first time. The only relief is that the beast will be defeated before her. The furious creature prepares to attack again, but she manages to cut its attack. Surprised, she realizes that the beast is about to kick her. At that moment, she cuts its paw with her power, leaving it in great pain. The beast then decides to use its tail for the attack. On the ground, the investigator thinks she was using her mana too much. For a moment, she can't even breathe. She feels her ability slipping away and reaching its limit. She would have to end this right then. She casts her last power, waving her hands. The spell moves toward the monster. The beast is hit by her wind magic. It swipes at her opponent with its tail. Not giving up, she launches another of her abilities, cutting off the tail of that huge monster. The battered beast tries to attack with its remaining paw. Once again, the investigator strikes, hoping that will stop it. The creature meets her in the middle of the attack. But suddenly, her mana runs out mid-movement, and the creature, Rouge, is right in her face. The protagonist runs toward the attack, blocking and breaking the beast's teeth. He asks her to finish the job, but her mana is running low. He shouts for her to pull herself together, and to push until the last drop to finish. She would just sit back and watch everyone get defeated again. She has flashbacks of the incident with her parents, remembering the monster that took them and her inability to help at that moment. All the happy moments they shared gave her strength. Determined, she gathers her last effort. A single, powerful blow strikes right in the middle of the beast. Pieces fly everywhere. Impressed with her ability, she is panting from her effort. But she remembers that the protagonist managed to defend her. How he managed to block a B-level attack. The protagonist congratulates her on the fight, and she continues to think about what happened. She informs everyone that the monster is defeated and that they can enter. The group finds her abilities incredible. They admired her impeccable work during the battle. One of the students points to a spot, and everyone looks. The portal to the exit has indeed opened. The protagonist says it's better for them to return to the normal world. Cien thinks that if his theory is correct, that guy had a lot of mana. It wouldn't be possible for any beast to hurt him. Confused, the protagonist looks back and calls her again to leave. She gathers her courage and asks the protagonist a question. She finishes the question and asks him about his sanity. Police vehicles surrounded the area. The protagonist holds the artifact he found in the dungeon in his hands. He feels relieved to have kept that bracelet with him. It's an artifact that blocks damage but can be used twice. If he hadn't used it earlier in that attack, he would have been defeated. He needs to hide it because thieves might want to steal it. The investigator approaches our protagonist, calling him. Our hero wonders why she seems so angry. She stops in front of him, furious. In his mind he was pretending to be hurt. She says she will never be grateful to him for such a feat. Our mage looks at her, not knowing what she is talking about. Before she finishes and really asks what happened, he interrupts her. He should feel grateful that she saved him. So he thanks her for saving not just him but the whole group. Our protagonist showers her with thanks. The investigator is surprised and speechless, but something interrupts her. A voice calls her, interrupting the conversation. One of the missing persons arrives and thanks her deeply. Her mother beside her also thanks for her work, while the investigator feels embarrassed and says it was just her job. In an instant, her thoughts enter her mind. For the first time, she had closed the dungeon, and people were grateful for it. This made her think about everything, why the protagonist did this, what he gets in return. Sweating cold, instead of asking for something in return, he thanks her. In her mind, she wanted to know what he was thinking. The protagonist stands up from the stone he was leaning against. He thinks for a moment if he could leave there now. Finally, the culprits were taken to prison. Moreover, his deal with the investigator ends tomorrow. Earlier, he tried to show his gratitude by giving her a smile. At that same moment, Cien is saying goodbye to the students. For a moment, they make eye contact. Our mage tries to express happiness, but it only looks like a maniac. She quickly turns away, scared of his expression. Our amoeba wonders if he made a terrible face at her. He had tried so hard at home, but so far, making expressions is not his strong suit. The two go their separate ways, opposite each other. A few days later, in a cafe, Cien is calmly drinking his coffee. Something catches his attention in that place. It was Yun, happy to have found him at the cafe. The hunter asks why she called him there, and she reveals she had something to ask. Yun drinks her iced coffee calmly. Upon hearing her ask about his master, he spits a little out. The investigator asks why such a suspicious reaction and says he wasn't prepared. While she drinks her coffee, she already knew that the two were very close. She questions if everything started on the day of Kiryo's kidnapping. But she saw the two coming out of the portal together, so she wondered what was going on. Yun, while wiping his sweat, asks why she is so curious. She reassures him by saying it has nothing to do with the association. But to be honest, she feels he might be a criminal, and Yun gets furious. She puts her coffee on the table and asks if he is involved, she can help. Yun tries to argue how she can speak like that about his master. He informs her that falsifying the ranking is a crime, and one can benefit from it in the industry. He ends up agreeing with her words. The investigator adds that seeing him with that guy makes her curious. She plants a seed of doubt because she thinks he is being manipulated. Yun feels like he is in an interrogation. Did his older brother reveal his rank? Many thoughts race through Yun's mind as he looks at the investigator. Did his older brother reveal his rank to protect the others? Cien interrupts his thoughts right then. She is not there to arrest anyone. She just wants to know the truth. Yun swallows his saliva, and the feeling that something is wrong is right there. He agrees to tell her everything about his master on one condition: that she promises it will all be a secret. Yun proposes a deal to the investigator. She agrees without a second thought, and feels relieved. The hunter swallows his words and begins to talk about when he met him. He recalls the incident with the golem, and how his team was defeated. The company advised him not to tell anyone, but if he is alive today, it is thanks to him. He places his hand on the table, having an impact, and remembers it like it was yesterday. He speaks very excitedly and remembers how his brother took down the golem. Meanwhile, she looks at him with a face that shows she finds the way he talks quite cringe. She advises him to just let her listen and asks for what reason. He concludes that he can lighten the situation just like John has Jan, an incident that occurred during an interview. Maybe he is afraid of overwhelming others with his power, so perhaps he is going in slippers precisely because of that. He finishes by saying there is no way his brother is involved in a crime. The investigator asks if he is not ambitious for money. She continues asking why he is so loyal to him when he doesn't know him for long. He counters the question and says he has helped him much more than she imagines. He helped him regain his confidence and almost sacrificed himself for him. The investigator asks what he means by sacrifice. He got hurt for some nobodies. How could she question him? At that moment, the investigator remembers that Kiryu did that for her. Trembling a little, she still thinks she cannot fully trust him. Shocked, Yun hears that she has only been talking about good things about him. Then she questions him if he has a side she has never seen. She talks about how suspicious he is and that he attacked another S-rank hunter. Before she can conclude more, he interrupts her. If she was talking about the incident with Zhong, it was the first time he attacked someone. The investigator looks at him, realizing he confessed to something. But she shouldn't get a bad impression of him. The story is different. He tells her that he had a conversation after the incident. Kiryu had said he erased him because he was trying too hard. He wanted to stop what was happening, and that happened. He stood in front of the investigator, finishing the story. Kiryu had no other way to stop him, so he did that. Cien is confused about how he had to erase the guy. Yun proudly says that his attitude was incredible. The agent is left speechless, and looks at him with a serious expression. But there is something more important to note in the story. How a rank F guy managed to erase the number 1 hunter in Korea. He was indeed manipulating his rank, but there is nothing more to be done in his case. Cien thanks him for clarifying the whole story of the protagonist. She tells him that she will not treat him as a potential criminal. Honestly, he didn't seem like a bad guy to her. She will admit those words just for now. As someone part of the association, it is a good thing he is lying about his rank. If this were to come out in the media, the guilds would completely collapse. Currently, in Korea, there are 3 types of guilds. Neo Sisters, which has a larger corporate fund and many members. Magic Tower, a guild full of talented awakeners led by Esther. And the Hunter Association, which is connected with some government matters. Because of the S ranks of each, everyone has influence. But what if an S rank member signed a contract with one of the guilds? In the worst case scenario, the association could lose influence. In the food court, where there are many people, a meeting takes place. The manager of Magic Tower introduces himself and meets the protagonist. The protagonist grimaces upon seeing the coffee, recalling the Alpha Ori glue. The interviewer asks if he is okay due to his disgusted expression. Why is the Alpha Ori crowd so obsessed with coffee? Kwok says it's better to get straight to the point. The manager states that it was a meeting about a unique opportunity, and the protagonist interrupts. Kwok is startled by his reaction, and Kiryu asks directly. Slamming his hand on the table, he asks if he is insinuating that he should join the Magic Tower Guild. A few days ago at the Magic Tower, Kwok, frustrated, tells the guild leader to wait a moment, because he needs to hire an F ranker. His lovely leader says that her mission is to bring him to the company. Wasn't he the one whining about needing to grow the team? But with that ranking, he would waste all his mana on just one skill. While debating with his leader, she tells him to stop complaining. She reveals that some awakened individuals can show their weaknesses in a simple conversation. But would that be the case with Kim Kiryu? He counters, saying that he doesn't need to know the details, but he is not an F rank. He had prepared a temporary contract for him, and if he needs money, he should talk to her. She was even determined to prepare a blank check. The manager asks if he is worth all that money, but Esther says she still doesn't know. His record is clean. Kwok is filled with doubt. She doesn't even know how much he is worth, so why negotiate with him? While listening to complaints, she remembered his challenge. That guy had overcome the challenge in record time and didn't even use artifacts. Not to mention he didn't flinch when he cast the curse. So he really wasn't ordinary. If she could bring him to her side, it could be very beneficial. Even if he is a villain, it would be incredible to discover his nature before anyone else. She concludes her reasoning and asks the manager to hurry up. She needed to stop looking so dazed and contact him right away. The manager understands her mission and leaves the office. He thinks that in the end, hiring him will be easy, especially since everyone is looking for money. He pulls up his computer, ready to make contact. At that moment, our protagonist is not happy about the opportunity. Kwok swallows hard and prepares for his actions. He is aware that he has already rejected the hiring before, but they decided to reach out and see if they could discard this option. The last offer was made without thinking. Perhaps the new terms would please him. The manager places the contract on the table. The protagonist carefully analyzes the contract. This amount is very large for someone of his level. But even so, he is not interested. He wants his freedom. Our little amoeba, in favor of ending the scale, declines the offer. Kwok is surprised by his quick response. He asks the protagonist if he is already working with any guild. He reveals that he doesn't want to be part of any while the manager tries to negotiate. With a firm no on his face, he thinks he has a big challenge ahead. Maybe they had misjudged him. They were even willing to propose a blank check, but it seems he wouldn't accept. He had no reaction upon hearing about the blank check. Our mage only thought that he hated all companies. He says he won't have a choice while holding on to the contract. He asks them to forget the offer and reaches into his bag for something. What he was about to propose was something different, something temporary. Recently, they found an artifact that they couldn't analyze. The protagonist thinks that evaluating an artifact won't take long. He looks at the temporary request and analyzes it. He examines the contract page by page and sees how much all of this would cost. Surprisingly, he finds the proposal interesting. He asks without hesitation where to sign. The manager shows him where to sign, offering a pen to the protagonist. He writes his name on the contract, sealing the commitment. Then he asks where and at what time he should go. 2 days pass since this event. Kwok arrives at his job. The receptionist calls him, and he greets her. She surprises him by saying that Kiryu is waiting for him. The fact that he couldn't hire him still burns in his skin. When he experiences the service, he will be completely smitten. The manager calls him in, inviting him to enter the laboratory. The material for analysis is stored inside. The laboratory door opens for the two of them. The second analysis laboratory is impressive and high-tech. Kwok explains that this material came from a rank 8 portal and is unique. According to the association's table, it is the third rank of the 5 competencies. The evaluation is determined by the performance of the object. They arrive and stop in front of the object. Just by looking, it's clear that it's nothing ordinary. A grand sword with a purple core is seen. The manager informs him that the name of the sword is the Cursed Sword for now. I have a reason why it's called that. It was acquired after defeating an A-rank monster. Everyone was very excited because they found a rare item. However, when a hunter placed his hands on the sword, immediately shadows struck him, draining all his mana, leaving anyone who touches it completely zombified. In reality, it is a sword that absorbs every drop of mana from its body, but its absorption rate is abnormal, making analysis difficult. Scientists suspect there is some hidden additional item. The manager warns that this won't be easy for him either. At that moment, our protagonist grabs the sword by the hilt. Kwok is shocked by the scene while Kiryu analyzes it. He lets slip that he shouldn't analyze it that way. He just explained how dangerous that sword is. But how can he be so fine with the artifact in his hands? Not even our best hunters manage such a feat. The protagonist holds the weapon in his hands, observing it. Who exactly does the guild leader want to put inside the magic tower? He needs to complete his diagnosis. He looks back. He notices the manager completely shocked by the scene. But that object was simply a magical item that was like a vampire. However, the weapon also has a defense mechanism. The greater its ability, the faster it will drain your mana. So the protagonist was not affected by the artifact. The worried manager asks if he is okay. The result of his analysis is that the sword becomes stronger the more mana it absorbs. So how should they use the artifact when even A-rank hunters were collapsed? They should just endure so that the mana is not absorbed. The manager looked at him confused by his words. Don't tell me they never tried that option. Can they even do that properly? So basically, according to the analysis, they have to just endure the pain. What kind of heartless and brilliant idea is that? The protagonist realizes he can't, so he concludes that the magic tower is quite weak. Countering his assumption, the manager says it's for reserve hunter teams, so there wouldn't be enough hunters to make that play. Of the people he knows, Chang-ho would be a guy who could manage it. He returns the sword to the place where it was displayed. Kwok then concludes that only S ranks would be able to use the sword. The sword is on display for everyone to see while the manager still doesn't believe it. The manager thinks of various theories about our protagonist, but he is interrupted by Kiryu at that very moment. Kiryu asks if something is wrong while he bursts into laughter. Behind them, they hear a familiar voice entering the room. Esther enters the room and greets the two. She stops in front and notes that they are doing very well today. It turns out she heard that Kiryu was around and wanted to see him. The protagonist, fed up, says they have already finished their work there. Esther leans in and asks what the result is. Our mage thinks that if he messes up now, he will be in trouble. There's nothing dangerous about the sword. Esther asks if there's nothing hidden within it. She easily reaches for the sword with her hands. She even praised the blade contained in the sword. Almost having a heart attack, Kwok places his hand on his chest. The protagonist asked for the sword to check it before leaking it to his home. He was surprised with the leader wanting to gift it to him. No one from his guild could then receive it as a gift. Our hero thinks a bit before accepting. He had to be very careful. Esther jokes that the sword won't bite him. Immediately, he thinks that this is sarcasm from the Earthlings. She approaches him while trying to conclude a thought, but her phone rings at that exact moment. It was a notification of a disaster that was happening. Esther's phone also rings, and she quickly picks it up. She answers the phone in front of everyone there. She sighs, and the news is that an A-rank dungeon has been opened. Indeed, the world doesn't want to leave her alone. The protagonist asks why this dungeon is being reported directly to her. It seems that 2 A-rank dungeons were opened at the same time. How is it possible for 2 portals to appear out of nowhere? He checks his phone and realizes he received 2 alerts for these portals. He wanted to have coffee with the protagonist, but something interrupted them. The leader asks to call for reinforcements because they will have a lot of loot. The protagonist asks if he can go with them. He could analyze the mana stones. There wouldn't be any problem taking him along. But what would he do there? He wanted to see Esther battle in real time. Since he didn't see any curse skills, how about filling his head once? Acquiring all that mana, she is sure she is very skilled. The manager tries to warn him about something, but Esther interrupts him. She invites him into her car. It seems our little amoeba knows how to score points with others. This way, she will maintain a good relationship with that scary hunter. Esther walks ahead of the group and thinks about how much of a jerk he is. Why would he be interested in her power after neutralizing her last time? She slams the car door in frustration while remembering why on earth he needs to see. Inside the car, she tells him to go straight to their destination. Everyone fastens their seatbelts before they actually head to the portals. The car goes very fast, and Esther thinks that this jerk can't treat her like this. Why is he provoking her out of absolutely nowhere? And the next time he does this again, she won't let him get away. It seems Mr. Kim is much tougher than he appears. The city is in chaos because of the portals. One of the hunters guides them back. Arriving at their destination, she notices that the portals are quite large. 2 giant red portals are open side by side. Esther checks if everyone has evacuated and prepares by rolling up her shirt sleeves. She concentrates all her energy in her hand and doesn't even know where to start. The protagonist, getting out of the car, looks at the portals. Unlike the blue portals, these spit out monsters at all times. A loud sound is heard from within one of them. It must be the sound of some monster inside the portal. Esther orders them not to stay close to her. It seems like it will end up making a mess. Immediately, the hunters run to the opposite side, leaving Kiryu confused. The manager calls him, worried about what is to come. From now on, don't stay too close to our boss. They really trust Esther's ability. With all this, she will really be fine alone. Huge claws emerge from the portal while the leader observes the pause. A swarm of flying monsters appears on the scene. Huge stone monsters also take over the streets. They pass in front of Esther, who concentrates her ability in her hand. Illuminated with yellow eyes, they are everywhere. The stone monsters walk with marbles using them as weapons. There are mutant spiders scattered across the ground. No less important, a different figure appears. A wizard with a garland of bones attached to his head appears. The mystical creature concentrates its power into red sparks, forming a sphere and throwing it at a fixed point, where a great explosion occurs. It is utter chaos, monsters everywhere. How does she plan to deal with all of that alone? She plans to start on the left since she is left-handed. The hunter approaches the creatures that seem to be waiting for her. In one movement, she envelopes herself in completely purple mana. Her power is radiant, making her a point of light full of energy. It seems she doesn't even walk. She struts toward the monsters. At that moment, she wraps all the monsters in purple chains. They become trapped, unable to make any movement. As she walks, it looks like a massacre. Monsters are defeated in the blink of an eye. The flying monsters fall, leaving Kiryu shocked. She really had defeated them all in an instant. That woman was truly something else. Esther gains momentum and goes on the attack with her chains. The large monsters are not a problem for her. She just needs to concentrate her ability, and she can defeat them all. Kiryu just watches her insane attacks. Meanwhile, the manager and other hunters can only watch. She really has great skill. The protagonist analyzes the monsters and realizes they are different from the normal ones. They have more mana and seem to be controlled by that wizard. Esther continues her massacre without rest. The purple chains move like living snakes, destroying everything in their path. The flying monsters try to retreat but are pulled by the chains. In seconds, they are smashed to the ground. Her power is truly monstrous. Kiryu thinks it's no wonder she is called the leader of the magic tower. Esther takes a deep breath and prepares for the next attack. The wizard from the portal raises his hand and conjures another red sphere. She just smiles disdainfully. The sphere is thrown at her. But in a quick movement, the hunter wraps the magic with her chains. The energy is neutralized instantly. Kiryu watches in disbelief. That woman is truly a monster among hunters. But still, he notices something strange in the wizard's mana. It seems to be draining energy from within the portal. Maybe he is not an ordinary monster. Esther finishes off the smaller monsters and begins to advance against the wizard. The manager shouts for her to be careful, but she completely ignores him and charges forward. The chains pierce the wizard's body. However, he disappears in a cloud of smoke. It was just an illusion. Kiryu immediately understands that the true enemy has not yet revealed itself. The ground begins to tremble in front of the portal. A gigantic figure starts to emerge from it. The hunters are terrified by the sight. It is a colossal golem covered in black rocks. Its eyes shine with blood-red light. The pressure it emits is overwhelming. Esther grits her teeth and prepares to face it. Kiryu feels a shiver run down his spine. This monster is not something an ordinary hunter could confront. Even a rank S would have difficulties. The manager orders everyone to retreat immediately, but Esther stands firm. She wraps her chains around her own body, and then she launches herself at the golem. The chains latch onto the creature's arm. She pulls with all her strength, trying to bring the giant down. But the golem doesn't even budge. With a simple movement, it shakes its arm, throwing Esther far away. She crashes through part of a building and gets up, coughing blood. Even so, she smiles as if she had been expecting this. Kiryu runs to the edge of the street, trying to see her condition. The manager shouts for him not to approach. Esther raises her hand, signaling everyone to stay back. The golem raises its fist, preparing to crush everything. Esther's chains shine brighter. She concentrates an absurd amount of mana in her hands. The air around vibrates with energy. Kiryu senses that something dangerous is about to happen, and he wonders if that woman can really defeat such a monster alone. Looking at his hand, which is smoking, he realizes he touched poison. The leader thanks him for his kindness, and notes that not thanking would be rude. Even as the leader, she takes too many risks. Reinforcements arrive with a towel to remove the poison. Today's incident wouldn't have happened if the civilian had stayed quiet. Esther asks the protagonist what he would have done in that situation if the civilian had been involved. Being so calm, he would have handled it well at that moment. He asks the question and continues cleaning the sleeves of his shirt. Then the protagonist reveals that he has been in a similar situation once. In that situation, he cancelled his spell, but everything nearby exploded, and because of that, the civilian's arm exploded. Esther, shocked by his response, indignantly asks how that happened. The protagonist adds that nothing is more precious than life. As he finished his sermon, he had a last-minute emergency. Our hero, sweating profusely, apologizes and runs down the street. Meanwhile, Esther wonders if he is feeling a bit unwell. Kiryu's words echoed in Esther's mind. The emergency for our protagonist is that he has no tolerance for poison. In a ruin, Esther is sharing her thoughts. At first, she thought Kim was a jerk, but after talking to him, he wasn't as bad as she thought. While talking about the protagonist, she plays with some chains. Generally, those with great abilities have difficult personalities to deal with, but Kiryu seems sensible and very polite. If he is not a villain, why does the great Esther have to bother him? Esther, emerging from the portal, grabs the chains that lead to two chained guys. She has to manually register the bodies, and there is no area inside the portal. When they are going to launch a camera that works in there, she wants to finish this quickly, so she takes a photo. At the moment of the photo, she effortlessly lifts the two bodies. She recalled Kiryu's advice that someone like her should be at the top. Her fellow hunter suddenly falls silent. Esther wonders how she can bring him to her side. The hunter says it seems she has a crush on him. The leader emphasizes that she managed to analyze the cursed sword. If the guy were by her side, nothing would be a match for her. But it seems it will still be a long story. She wishes he were a game character to level up her affection. She always makes this kind of comparison since she used to play a lot. For now, she doesn't play anymore because she is too busy. It's quite pathetic not to have anyone behind bars after the incident. She wishes that those who prey on the weak would perish. With the advancement of technology, life has become harder for criminals. But one day, something called a portal appeared in the world, and everything changed. The power that came with monsters from another world also arrived. It challenged the science and comfort that humans had built over generations. Since then, criminals have been the hardest to deal with. There weren't many awakened individuals in law enforcement to capture criminals, nor did they have means to punish these criminals. The government decided to take measures behind the scenes. They hired S-level awakened individuals to secretly deal with these individuals. Esther was resting in her office after dealing with criminals that week. At that moment, her assistant appears, asking if she has finished the report. There were some missing pieces of information in that report. It didn't matter how tired she was. She couldn't let public opinion get worse, even if she said that about her people. She takes her work very seriously, being extremely honest. Esther asks if there's anything else she can contribute, and she has some fresh news. The leader asks to see this news, which is brief. On the tablet, we see an article written about an invisible man. Could he be another type of awakened criminal? Kiryu is listening to the news while eating his ramen. He gets some information about the invisible man. The news presents an expert to discuss this case. In answering the questions, the expert believes it is a very meticulous man. He also believes that an analytical hunter will be needed to handle the situation. At that moment, the protagonist pauses the news report. He feels satisfied with the food he has eaten. He checks Yoon's message, which is almost here but very late. The moment he helped analyze the sword was well compensated, so he decided to buy something with that money. Yoon arrives, tears in his eyes, apologizing for the delay. The protagonist asks if they are far from their destination. He looks directly at the hunter's market. They walk together until they reach their destination, which was just across the street. Our little amoeba was kidnapped and went through a tough time. He realized he needed tools to level up. Yun says that the protagonist is the first person who doesn't know where the market is, but our mage thinks that the previous owner of the body also didn't go there. Somehow, he feels that with each passing day, he gets closer. Yun sees a lemonade stand and asks his older brother to wait. While waiting, he notices something but has to get closer to confirm. A sign states that only those with a hunter's license can enter. Yun returns with the lemonades in hand. It seems that weapons are sold on the second floor, which he desperately needs. The first floor is only for products made from loot. On the upper floor, there are many stunning shelves. Our little amoeba is shocked by so many cool things. His mage soul screams inside. If he could, he would buy everything. But since he is short on money, he focuses only on what he needs. He looks in the display and sees an ice bomb that freezes nearby. That would be something useful to take with him. Kiryu drinks his lemonade when he sees the price. He spits everything out, as just one item costs an arm and a leg. He looks at a sword that is also expensive. Then he is shocked by another item and its price. He was surrounded by expensive things from side to side. Noticing that Kiryu was about to leave, he asks if he wants to go to the VIP room. Not knowing there was a VIP room, Yun follows. But at that moment, the invisible man manages to steal one of the items. In the VIP room, our protagonist spots something. He sees a potion that fully restores mana, but he turns his back and leaves because he thinks it's too expensive as well. He likes everything he sees but has no money to buy anything. He sits on the couch, relaxing a bit from his frustrating shopping experience. Yun asks if he wants something to eat. The protagonist grumbles, asking him to sit still and be quiet. When the money fell into the account, he felt rich but didn't know everything was expensive. Yun says that his friend has very high standards for things. The list only looked at expensive things, and even those weren't good enough. Everything that captivates the protagonist is expensive, especially since he is the mage. At that moment, we see a transparent shadow passing through the merchandise. Confused, he rubs his eyes and realizes he saw a blurred figure of a man. He realizes it was the awakened one who appeared on the news that morning. He asks what he would be doing with all those items in that bag. Our protagonist asks Yun if he saw the news about the invisible guy. Yun said he heard that he has a strange but talented ability. Only the protagonist can see the invisible man. Kiryu asks if it would be more appropriate for Yun to capture him. Then he gives instructions on how to catch him, recalling the game Pokemon. Yun was very confused by the steps, but his older brother told him to stay where he was and attack with a charge. At that moment, the awakened one's ability was deactivated, causing him to fall backward. When attacking the opponent, he falls brutally to the ground. Yun realizes something really touched his arms and sees all the stolen objects on the ground. The invisible man's nose was covered in a lot of tomato juice. In front of the people, he asks who he was. Before he could answer, our protagonist shouts that there is a thief there. He yelled to call all the market security immediately. It seems that our protagonist really hasn't had a day of rest. One of the guards restrains the thief on the ground. Still in the market, Yun says that the protagonist is incredible. Yun, amazed, continues talking with his older brother. A question arises. How did he manage to get past the detectors? The protagonist assumes he must have entered through the window. He asks his friend if he wants to go out for a snack and that he will pay. It seems that shopping will have to wait for another day, but something catches his attention. There is a mirror that reflects the spell back at the sorcerer. Our hero looks at the mirror as if he wants to lick it. He shouts to pack that one for him. Yoon asks if he came to buy just that. With a makeover, this mirror will have an incredible ability. In a secluded place, there is a man watching the news. The news reports that the invisible man has been caught. At that same moment, the man stops watching. He talks to a woman and says that this guy was caught very quickly. He assumes that one of the hunters must have seen him from afar, but that's not what happened. In reality, it was his older brother who had seen the silhouette of the man. The girl points to the guy who identified him first. She explains that he identified him, and only Yoon made the attack. While they are talking, they are interrupted by one of the henchmen. They had arrived with the supplies they had secured. He orders them to remove the packaging from the package since they are going to sell it to the black market. He also advises that there should be no scratches on the package, or they are dead. He goes back to talking to the woman who is trembling in horror. The man thinks he has done everything to avoid being caught, and yet he has still lost people. They even changed his hideout. He doesn't know where his information was leaked, but he knows who eliminated his henchman, the leader of the guild. Also, that psychopath with blonde hair. They won't have a chance unless they delay the assassination of that guy a little bit. A guy who has rank A ability to cut everything he touches. After that awakening, he lived doing what he wanted. After a while, he gathered awakened ones who were not registered and formed a gang. John did everything, even murder, in his gang. But his plans started to go wrong. The guild leader began to close in. The criminal talks to his associate, saying he doesn't understand about the invisible man. Could it be that his supplier had trolled them? In the previous test, they couldn't even sense his presence. He even robbed other busy places because he was caught there. It's so ridiculous. It's really hard to understand the circumstances. The criminal looks at his phone and shares that the blonde guy found him right away. Maybe he is useless, but if they research enough, they might find something. The next day at the criminal's hideout, after pulling his file, he is surprised by everything he got himself into, especially at such a low level. The criminal's concern is to know if he is working along the same lines as him. They are determined to find this guy and his profile. He wants to make sure he will keep his mouth shut. Then the girl starts to say that she remembers his name. It seems she heard it some time ago. The impatient man begins to press for the information. He orders her to stop being frustrating and just give the information. One of the traffickers who had done business with him was keeping an eye on someone else. This hunter was the last one who kidnapped. His name was Kim Kiryo. According to rumors, it wasn't Chan Ho who killed everyone, but another guy. The criminal, frustrated for not having noticed earlier, puts his hand on his head. He only got out of that situation because Chan Ho helped him. The boss feels a familiar sensation seeing that he feels they are in the same business. But that was good for them because they were not part of the magic tower, giving him time to act before Esther gets involved. So where is this F-level guy? On the same day at the protagonist's house, there are some containers on the table with potions. Our mage looks at himself in the mirror, talking about how incredible he plans to be. He asks himself in the mirror if becoming the great mage wasn't enough. Just thinking that he was successful in another experiment from his hometown makes him happy. There is a rat that obeys his orders according to what he asks. He jots down some notes about this experiment. Since he heard it was a success, he has to try something bigger. His goal is to control a human, but it will be difficult to find a fresh body. The little rat tries to reach something, but at that moment, the potion runs out. The duration of his experiment is really terrible. Our protagonist goes to a park. He buries his lab rat next to the raccoon. Burying them seemed like the right thing to do. He stands up and realizes he will need a fresher sample. If things were different, he would completely observe this planet. Our protagonist comes face to face with a mysterious energy. A shadow of a hand is positioned right in front of his face, and the gang leader appears right in front of him. Kiryo is confused by the image of the man. Our protagonist asks what the hell he is doing, so he can really see him even while being invisible. The mysterious man snaps his fingers and returns to his normal appearance. The mobster asks if he has plans for today. He stands completely still in front of the protagonist. For a moment, I wondered if he had seen him somewhere to know his name. Our protagonist says he is going to the mountain. The guy accompanies him and asks if he was the first to complete the maze challenge. He also mentions that he heard rumors that he and Esther are very close. For a moment, he thinks about where those rumors came from. Excited, the guy asks if he is already part of a guild, but Kiryo denies it. From the very first moment, his questions are completely strange. With a psychopathic look, the man asks why he answers everything without reacting. Where did this guy come from? Not a hint of fear about the situation, he surprises him. The strange man compliments him, saying that he is well trained, and he prepares to ask his last question. How does he manage to see the invisibility skills? He remains interested and asks if it is an item or something similar. The protagonist wonders how he is going to get out of this now. The two stare at each other for a moment. In the end, the man simply tells him not to tell anyone. He thinks his tactic won't work on him. The impatient protagonist wants to get out of there, but he asks him to wait. He needs to know the main point. Our hero asks how he knew his name. The boss asks if that was all he wanted to know, but the man introduces himself as Park Juntae. The protagonist looks at his outstretched hand and decides not to shake it. Park mocks him, asking if he saw something in his hand too. That guy had a different formula in his hands. He completely cuts everything he touches, looking like a fruit ninja. Someone like Kiryu would be sliced in seconds. Juntae then concludes that he is indeed the guy from the maze. He asks him to smile a little, but how can one smile in a situation like this? The man was there just to make a proposal. Kiryu's ability is disrupting Park's business. He could have dealt with the protagonist, but that would be a huge waste. He wanted to recruit him for his team and offers double his current salary. He is really throwing this out there to leave him with no choices. In this completely isolated place, this guy intends to deal with the protagonist if he doesn't say yes. He won't even wait for a concrete answer while Park prepares to attack him. The protagonist thinks about how he is going to get out of that situation. Park, tingling his hand to attack the protagonist, waits for a response. With sweat on his face, the protagonist asks him if he will close the deal for double. He is impressed that he wants to switch sides now. He doesn't need to worry. He won't fall into a trap with this. He made a good choice and is sure he will like the job. They should discuss the details more on their way out. Indeed, both of them had many questions for each other. At that moment, Kiryu thought if he runs, he gets caught, and if he stays, he gets eaten. He decides to slap his hand, showing that he doesn't want to follow him. He looks at him disappointed, but for his own good, there's no escaping. He smashed all the cameras he had in that place. At that moment, Park realizes something about the protagonist. The protagonist didn't want to be part of his team, leaving him with only one option. Kiryu asks if he was going to finish him off there, putting his hand in his pocket. Applying the mana amplifier into his veins, Park would have no choice since no one in the group could brainwash him. Kiryu's eyes light up with a blue glow. A gentle breeze begins to form nearby. Tree leaves are swept away, and Park is startled by such movement. Suddenly, the sound of crows cawing echoes. They appear from the sky, descending right near both of them. Park is very scared, trying to understand what is happening. Before he could finish his sentence, our protagonist interrupts him. With the crows behind him, he asks if he is going to start crying now. The birds surrounded them like a whirlwind. Park, trembling at his core, keeps asking what that was. That is all the protagonist can do at that moment. Gather all the bodies of crows near the mountains to draw. Not understanding anything, all the crows begin to fall. What terrifies him about that scene? Sweating cold, he starts to look around. While he screams, he tries to protect himself by putting his hand on his head. That trick was just a distraction to call for help from the police. Even if he is attacked in the middle of the call, the bracelet will protect him. At that moment, he falls to his knees out of pure terror. He begs and pleads for those things to stop. The blonde boy looks serious, somewhat confused by the mess. He thinks that those attacks have no one controlling them from behind, and concludes that it can only be the work of a curse-type hunter. He ends up shocked, realizing the danger. The guy is reflecting that killing someone just with a curse is not easy. He stares closely and becomes even more suspicious. He explains that even the instincts of animals work as a defense against this. But he lets slip that there is only one person in the world capable of doing that. And the stylish redhead appears in the midst of the swarm of crows. He is in shock for having managed to exterminate that bunch of birds all at once. The blonde simply calls the police in the middle of the chaos, as if nothing were happening. The other one is like, "Dude, who is this weirdo?" he thinks. Does this guy not even realize the monster in front of him? Meanwhile, the guy on the ground is already preparing a golden attack in his hand. But the blonde says, "Don't move," and points the gun. And they end up staring at each other in a Wild West atmosphere. The guy on the ground is already freaking out, thinking, "Crap, this blonde is way too dangerous." He arms himself with purple energy, ready to attack from hiding. But he decides that the best thing is to get out of there as soon as possible. The blonde remains calm on his phone, coordinating the location to pick him up. Out of nowhere, there's an explosion of energy that almost engulfs everything. The villain's eyes widen in panic, and the blonde realizes that things are getting serious. In the same dark setting, Kiryu finds himself. He thinks that for now, he has managed to handle the situation. At that very moment, he hears a voice. Two characters wonder what happened there, while our protagonist sees a very familiar person. It was the hunter Wu Yun in the middle of the crowd. The hunter is surprised to see the protagonist. She ends up asking how he ended up there. She wishes he wouldn't say he was involved in that too. They were discussing the incident in a cafe. The awakened one who attacked the protagonist should not be recorded. She ends up asking what the ranking of the awakened one would be, and if compared to hers, was it higher or lower? He surprises her by saying it would be at the same level as hers. He ends up asking how he got away, but the awakened one was scared and left. In the silence, the protagonist asks her a question. Does he sometimes seem scary, and that made her spit out her drink? She thinks very carefully before speaking but takes a good look at his psychopathic face. The investigator says he doesn't seem scary, but she's lying. It's not him who is scary, but his history. Our protagonist also realizes that today's incident was quite suspicious. All the people who had contact with him ended up dying. Something just doesn't seem right. In the boss's hideout, he finds himself watching TV. The news reports that there was a wave of crows that simply fell from the sky. And suddenly, he is interrupted by a voice. Hopefully it's worth his time because she was doing more important things. We see a hooded figure approaching while he has his hand on his face. She calms him down and asks him to relax. To him, that case was premeditated and not part of the plans. She informs him that there is nothing she couldn't premeditate. He interrupts the figure with a shout. He said he would end Esther's work to make that very clear. The figure is shocked by such a vow. She reveals that a lot of information has just come in. The guy who captured the invisible man is connected to Magic Tower. The hooded figure asks if there is a problem regarding that. Then the figure proposes another type of plan. Instead of taking Esther, how about taking Kirio? She throws a bucket of cold water, saying it won't work. They are both the same rank. This information was confirmed yesterday, so he was like the figure who faked his rank. But for her, that's just a headache. The figure then concludes that she will assassinate an S rank, especially since that was the agreement. In the Rakshasa temple, they divert funds from creditors, providing economic support for criminals. And these cultists were obsessed with one thing, assassinating S ranks. The temple supported a lot to end the story there. Park had said he could easily kill someone like Esther. She interrupts him, saying they should have given the right ability from the start. He looks directly into the eyes thinking it would end there. The leader mocks him, and if he doesn't complete the job, she won't support him anymore. He leaves asking her to resolve this quickly. He asks one last question if any S rank would be willing. This is his last chance. If not, the cultist will really cut off the funds. He believes he wouldn't want that, right? With that, there's news that will help. Haezong is returning to Korea. 6 years ago on the coast of Busan was the year the dungeon occurred. The giant monster with tentacles emerged from the coast, and the world turned into hell. More monsters that were not affected by human weapons appeared. And although awakened ones appeared on the planet, it wasn't enough to restore the peace of the past. But that was when Korea's miracle appeared, the first S rank. With immense power, no one was able to defeat him. His abilities had no limits, and he handled everything alone. A young man saved the city of Busan from disappearing. It was the birth of a national legend. Later, in a huge building, a luxury car stops in front of him. Haezong arrives in Korea after completing his mission. He thanks his driver before getting out, but outside there's something waiting for him. A large crowd is waiting for Haezong. He doesn't know how they found out his schedule. His fans are there to welcome him. Haezong remains calm in the situation and gets out of the car. The crowd goes wild, resembling the World Cup. He parades while everyone takes pictures of him. The guy really is a perfect 10 in Korea. His presence is absolute. My concerned assistant approaches him. The assistant apologizes for the crowd and says he will escort him. As expected, his popularity was incredible. The hero of Korea asks if anything happened in Seoul while he was away. His assistant informs him that there was an incident, but Esther had resolved it. The elevator arrives at their floor and Haezong notices something. He takes the opportunity to ask what happened with the F-rank case. The shocked assistant asks what he means. Haezong asks if his report had any kind of result. The employee pulls up his reevaluation in the system, but there's nothing different. The hero is incredulous and gives him a disapproving look. They tested with newer equipment, but nothing was different. That guy really was F-rank. Haezong stares into space, wondering if the equipment could be wrong. Then he asks to see who conducted the test. The assistant hands the documents to the hero. He takes them and sees that it was Cien responsible for that test. That nerd hadn't manipulated the test. She followed the rules strictly. So he sets that topic aside for a moment and asks about the dungeons. He just arrived and is already planning his next steps. Maybe he should try the nearest portal. Under a bridge near the highway, Haezong arrives at the nearest portal. While thinking about Kirio really being an F rank, he walks into the portal and thinks he has to find him in person to check this. He passes through the portal and thinks about getting his address from the association and visiting him. At that moment, he bumps into another hunter who is coming towards him. He turns to apologize to this hunter, but he was shocked. It was Kirio who bumped into him. What was he doing inside that portal? A few minutes ago inside the B-rank portal. The reason the protagonist entered that portal was simple. He couldn't stop his research now. He had already managed to control animals. Now he wanted to control monsters. If he could control that, it would be huge. but finding a fresh monster body is more difficult, since many of those bodies are mangled. But the monsters in that dungeon have nothing of value, making it easier. In that case, they wouldn't be perfect specimens for him. But even so, he wouldn't be able to hunt due to his level. He simply plans to steal one of the bodies that a team defeated before him. That was the perfect plan, but there were no bodies, no trace of a battle. That portal was really so unpopular. At that moment, he hears something. A monster that looked like a chicken was near him. The protagonist hides in the leaves and sees that it is one of the monsters. But he couldn't defeat it, it was beyond his reach, so he gives up on his plan and leaves. On the way, he wonders if he could defeat a C rank monster. He can't always ask his friend to defeat the monsters for him. The most important thing to remember is that there was no awakened one controlling bodies. If his friend questioned him, it would be a big problem. At that moment, he bumps into someone and is surprised when he looks. It was the hunter Haezong, who was already asking what he was doing there. In an instant, he draws his sword and points it at Kiryu. He shouldn't be there. It wasn't meant for Kiryu. He had said that what he was doing there was level F. The hero of Korea then concludes that he had indeed falsified his ranking. What was the Hunters Association doing? He was secretly planning to kill those level B monsters. The protagonist tries to say it was just a mistake, and Haezong gets furious. Kiryu realizes he won't get out of there so easily. He has messed up. Finding him suspicious, he doesn't lower his sword. The protagonist then has an idea to apologize. Honestly, he was just curious about what he would find. But the hero of Korea wasn't going to let him leave. In the midst of this confusion, Park Juntae crosses the portal. The criminal looks at the escalating situation. He had seen that Haezong entered alone and decided to follow him. And what Kiryu was doing there was too much information. Park thinks before returning to the portal that this could only be a joke. Why was he always on the side of the hunters who were his targets? One way or another, he wasn't going to assassinate Haezong with his level F. But even so, he couldn't just back down now. The criminal remembers he has to finish that job. With the thought that he can't back down now, he grabs his bag. He has no choice but to use one of the tools the cult gave him. A particle that can destroy a specific weapon. He prepares that bomb in his hands and decides to use it. Park throws it toward the open portal. The ball doesn't pass through. It seems to get stuck in the portal. It creates a large, red rupture in the portal. That gradually grows, breaking the portal. The shards become stronger, and Park gets scared. The portal begins to collapse, creating a huge wind. Pieces of the portal fly everywhere. The portal was completely destroyed by a bomb. On the other side of the portal, Kiryu realizes the exit has vanished. Haezong looks and asks him to stop joking and if this is something the protagonist was doing. As our protagonist was doing that, he was being held the whole time. The portal was shut down in the blink of an eye. How could that have happened? Then the protagonist wonders how that occurred. Two ways it happens. If the monsters hit a certain population or the boss is killed. But neither of those options happened there. At that moment, they hear a very loud noise. Monsters are running toward them while the hunters try to understand what creature is there. The two hunters look ahead. Our protagonist tries to understand what they are seeing. Suddenly a herd of monsters arrives. But those monsters were different. They seemed not to be from that dungeon. They were minotaurs, the bosses of the labyrinth, unlike anything they had seen before. The hero of Korea is shocked. How could they be bosses? How could there be so many bosses like that? It seems that a new boss was created in that portal. Since no one had defeated the boss before, the portal created other types of bosses. The protagonist seems not to understand the situation, but they are in deep trouble. At that moment, the hero says he can't fight. But the hero of Korea says he has no intention of protecting him. That man who called himself a hunter couldn't protect himself. How could that level S hunter ask him to survive in this chaos? If that was a grudge from the last incident, he wasn't the one who struck him. Why was the hero of Korea doing that? At that moment, Haezong completely despises him for his attitude. People like him wear down his teeth when he sees them. The protagonist tries to speak, but he is cut off every time. Then he shouts that he only has the ability to analyze. The hero of Korea simply ignores him and his words. At that moment, one of the minotaurs prepares to attack. He reaches for his sword and draws it from the sheath, and in one movement, he completely cuts the monster in half. Haezong completes that he should analyze and get out of that situation alone. He leaves the protagonist behind, running into the forest. Kiryu thinks about giving a dislike to everything he posts. Alone in the middle of that jungle, he realizes he is in a terrible situation. The herd of minotaurs seems to be chasing him. Kiryu has to get out quickly. The monsters are coming. If he stops to catch his breath, he will be completely overwhelmed by the herd. One of the minotaurs concentrates, forming power in its horn, dancing like a bomb toward the protagonist. The protagonist realizes that his stamina won't hold out. He has to find somewhere to hide, but at that moment, Haezong appears, cutting one of the minotaurs completely in half. He starts defeating all the minotaurs that were there. With his power, he is able to burn the monsters and the forest. Not stopping there, he tears apart all the monsters in the herd. But even after defeating everything, the portal back home still hasn't appeared. Suddenly, one of the minotaurs punches the protagonist from behind. He realizes he is in the eye of the storm and needs to stay close to the hero from Korea. The minotaur prepares by drawing a pentagram to cast a spell. The ability was indeed stone thorns. The protagonist realizes that if he gets hit, he will be killed. So he runs in great fear of losing his life, screaming. The hero from Korea prepares to defeat this minotaur. As the protagonist runs towards him, a rain of stones forms on the ground. In a cut, the hero from Korea blocks the spell, leaving a burned trail on the ground. After the battle, he wonders if everything is clear. At that moment, he hears a noise of pain behind him. The hero from Korea looks back and realizes he has hurt the protagonist. Haezong shouts to see if the protagonist is okay. He notices that the arm is completely burned. The hero tries to find a healing potion, and blames himself for his ability. Shocked, he begins to apologize to the protagonist. He asks if he is conscious, if he is present. Trembling on the ground, our protagonist says he is fine. Haezong is shocked by the situation, but the pain is so great that he can't even cry or scream. Being alive, those burns can be healed with magic. The trembling protagonist tries to get up and apologizes for being so close. Haezong is shocked and asks why he is apologizing. They will postpone the treatment for a moment. They need to focus on getting out of there first. The protagonist's analytical power is useful but only protected him for a moment. He was asking for protection because he knew he couldn't manage alone. Haezong appears, defeating another minotaur. The minotaur has a hammer and prepares to attack, but he manages to cut the hammer into pieces. He uses his fire power to slice the minotaur in half. The minotaur gradually falls to pieces on the ground. Haezong walks calmly through that battlefield. At that moment, Kiryu calls him and realizes that was the last one. The protagonist points to a place where a portal has appeared. They should leave as quickly as possible before it disappears. The hunter helps the protagonist out due to his injuries. Walking together towards the green portal, they cross the passage, and Kiryu thanks him for the hard work. Now he needs to go home and heal from the burns. Haezong asks to take him to the hospital and pay all the expenses, but the protagonist decides he can handle it alone. All this time, he was really someone without powers. He thought he was some lazy hunter pretending to be F rank. What should he do with that horrible feeling? A few days later at the Hunters Association, the assistant serves coffee to the hero from Korea. He shouldn't worry, he had already been through a lot this week. The assistant notices Haezong's worried face. He asks if there is another problem. He didn't seem well. Haezong says that inside the portal, an F rank was hurt by his power. The assistant asks if he supported the expenses. He let the protagonist go because he refused his help at that moment, and he didn't ask for anything more to be rewarded. But they can't let this happen. They try to get in touch. It might create rumors, although Haezong thinks otherwise. That wasn't just his problem, but that incident could ruin his career. If it were another hunter, it would be fine. But if the hero from Korea were involved in this scandal, the public would be anxious. The assistant concludes by saying he will take care of the procedure. They really can't have any problems. In the protagonist's apartment on a sunny day, Kiryu was conducting more crazy experiments at his home. For that day's experiment, he wanted to see if he could have pain tolerance. Eliminating that feeling could cause problems. So he would just nullify the pain up to a certain point, getting close to what it was before. He didn't want to feel the agony of being burned again. And he didn't need that kind of information either. At that moment, the protagonist feels a rumble behind him. A red flash hits his eyes, illuminating everything. The walls cracked, and his instruments broke. Kiryu feels the ground shaking and doesn't understand what's going on. He puts his hand on the walls to stabilize himself. A voice made the protagonist worried. It was for everyone to evacuate. The protagonist jumps to the other side of the room. What could be causing all that chaos? Kiryu looks up and sees the sky covered by a red portal. The buildings near his had been taken away. The protagonist looks anxiously at the situation. There are flying monsters passing through the portal. Quickly, the protagonist grabs his items and evacuates from his apartment. Kiryu tries to call Yun but realizes his phone isn't working. In that moment, he sees someone else also trying to get a signal. At that moment, he hears someone shouting to run. It was flying monsters chasing a crowd. One of them grabs a citizen with its tentacles, lifting him up while screaming for help. The other creatures also begin to capture everyone who was there, flying in the sky with these people while the protagonist escapes. But he doesn't know where to go. He looks at the subway station and wonders if he should go there. As he approaches, some agents tell him not to take another step. It seems that he wouldn't be able to enter there at all. The crowd could trample him before the monsters get him. Our protagonist realizes that he will have to escape in his own way. Looking to the side, he notices that the buildings were covered in a blue light. Feeling the mana of that place, he devised his plan. He could simply dodge and hide in places they wouldn't notice. As he dodged, he felt a different presence in that place. He sensed a different power and decided to follow it. He followed the confident trail of that power he had felt before. A hunter was finishing off one of the monsters, pulling his sword out from the monster's back. Haezong was dealing with the monsters in that area. An elite hunter appears when magical creatures are loose around. The protagonist feels like a parasite again, but after analyzing, he feels something different this time. Haezong's mana was very unstable. At that moment, Haezong is surrounded by flying monsters. However, he, sweating cold, feels very dizzy. It's been a long time since he slept properly due to his work. The situation seems to worsen as monsters surround him from all sides. Who could be behind that situation, and what was the purpose? The guild leader who was supposed to help couldn't return in time. At that instant, the monsters charge at Haezong furiously. Haezong prepares to deal with that scenario. He draws his sword and uses his power to get ready. With one slash, he manages to defeat those monsters. Chunks of the creatures gradually fall from the sky. All the beasts were successfully defeated. Exhausted, Haezong puts away his sword after the intense fight. He reaches into his pocket to grab a potion to recover from fatigue. At that moment, he realizes he is running low. Before he can drink it, he hears someone calling for help. A survivor crawls from under the rubble of a building. Haezong tells him not to move and that he will help him get out, removing the debris from on top of the victim. The citizen can't move, so he leans on Haezong. Supported by his shoulder, Haezong takes him to a base. However, he is surprised by the intention of that guy. The man grabs his neck in a chokehold. Worried, Haezong tries to understand what is happening. At that moment, the guy shows that he is wearing explosives. The hero of Korea's eyes widen as he realizes he is a suicide bomber. The place is engulfed in a bright flash followed by a loud explosion. The protagonist, who was watching, tries to shield his eyes from the impact. As the explosion passes, he shivers and realizes something horrible has happened. Haezong is on the ground, trembling in shock. He has several injuries, but the main one is on his chest. He tries to get up anyway while lamenting that he let his guard down. He wonders if it was a terrorist attack targeting him all along. He also questions if the recent incidents were orchestrated to drain his powers. Haezong pulls out the healing potion intending to drink it. But at that instant, he loses his strength and falls to the ground. Completely injured, he looks at the horizon. In front of him, Kiryu appears running towards him, calling out to him. When he arrives, he realizes that those injuries are no joke. Fortunately, the archmage brought a healing potion in his bag. Jong is still unconscious, lying on the ground. The protagonist takes the potion from the bag, wondering what he would do without the great archmage. Disoriented, he wakes up with the protagonist calling him. He opens his eyes wide as if his consciousness is returning. Kiryu asks if he can move. Haezong sits up to get a broader view of the situation. What was he doing there? The protagonist retorts that he was looking for shelter and found him. Kiryu advises him to change clothes while helping him. Haezong grabs the towel and brings it towards the body but notices something. The wound had disappeared. He asked if he had used some kind of potion on him. Curious, Haezong asks what potion it was that healed that wound so quickly. At that moment, he offers to pay for it, but Kiryu doesn't know what the price was. He had received it as a gift, so he didn't know how much it cost. The hero of Korea puts on another shirt, and at that moment, they hear something. The communication radio transmits that help is needed elsewhere. He grabs the radio intending to respond to the call. He answers and says he will head to the location, leaving Kiryu shocked. The guy literally came back from the dead and is already clocking in to go back to work. Kiryu warns that he cannot do that, and where he would be. He would have to rest because of his lungs and the explosion. The protagonist tries to advise him about his lungs, but Haezong is stubborn. Haezong says he would have no other option in that matter. Using his abilities, he could still become unable to use them. He grabs his sword, saying he would accept the risk. The archmage thinks about how frustrating he is as a man. The hero of Korea notices that while they are talking, people are dying. There would be no time, and he had to act quickly, but Kiryu interrupted him. Haezong would not be to blame for what was happening. It would be someone else's problem. He was not the only hunter in the city to stretch himself thin. He could let another hunter take care of it and go rest. Haezong says he will rest after finishing that job. He asks Kiryu to step aside because he wanted to pass. The protagonist refuses, and he would not leave there. The hero of Korea feels grateful for the help, but his attitude was interfering. Kiryu realizes that he is not listening to anything he says. That seemed excessive. Was he acting that way because of the association? He had seen many capable people being exploited. Haezong bumps into his shoulders, saying he would not have time for that. Kiryu turns to warn him about something. If he really goes, it will harm his lungs, and he will regret it forever. Haezong could not believe what that guy was saying. The guy with the lowest level giving a warning was pathetic. He was already saying goodbye when he decided something. He reached for an artifact in his bag. At that moment, Haezong says he would talk to him later. The artifact was thrown towards the hunter but was received very quickly. He drew his sword and cut him in half without thinking twice. Standing still, he asked what the hell he was doing. However, Haezong felt discomfort after knocking down the item. He had to sit on the ground while the place was enveloped in pink magic. Originally, it was an artifact meant to affect only B-level hunters, but our divine archmage modified it to affect S ranks as well. Kiryu apologizes and says that it was for his own good. The protagonist notices something different about Haezong. A ring he had never seen before would be an artifact for resistance to sleep, but it was too much to be caught by the same method twice. There would definitely be trouble after this episode, but he could not let him ruin his lung magic. Somehow, the protagonist identifies with him working too hard. The protagonist decides to carry that heavy man, while Haezong sleeps like a baby. Kiryu is so nice for his own good.